Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? I hope you guys are having an amazing weekend. Seems like spring has sprung. It is Saturday, April 13th, 2024, and we're doing something a little bit different this evening. It's a little later than usual. You might have noticed. You noticed probably a little bit of a different audio to the video for the intro today as well. This is all part and parcel for some of the things that we're having to do differently to continue to bring things that matter to the public square for discussion. And so tonight, Saturday night, thank you for taking the time to tune in. If you're not new here, you know what to do. Smash that like. Please give this a share. I think you're going to find this incredibly interesting. This one tonight, full disclosure, is not going to be one that you're going to want to have your children running around in the background. If you're watching it on a computer, I'll give you a couple of minutes here. We're going to bring Michelle Smith in here in just a minute. Because we're going to be doing something here tonight that's never been done, and this didn't happen lightly. So ladies and gentlemen, find your most soothing beverage, your favorite snack. This is going to be hopefully a couple of hours, but this will be some of the most interesting discussion and unpacking into decoding evil and seeing the signs. And with that, that's the perfect segue to bring in my special guest, Michelle, who is, unless you've been living under a rock, she's a very close friend and ally to the channel and the community here. Uh, she's a working trauma practitioner, and we have a relationship going back quite a ways, Michelle. And tonight, thank you for taking the time to hang out with us on a Saturday night in the spring, when I'm sure there's a bazillion other things that you could and would maybe rather be doing. But tonight, uh, we talked about this a lot coming into before we're doing this here. And heads up warning, guys. In the description, I had put a little bit of an explainer. After we get through explaining why we're doing this, what we're doing, before we actually get into the doing of it, I'm going to have to shut this stream down on Facebook, YouTube, and X. So I'll put links in there. I wanted to give everybody time to go and find us on some places where we are going to continue to stream this. There's a reason why I built whatsupcanada.org and lgm.news to do the things that we need to do, like tonight. And I'm not going into the genocide void on the Avatar universe and getting canceled and on the social media platforms because of this particular endeavor tonight. So there's going to be places you're going to be able to find it on you'll find it on Rumble. So get over on Rumble, lgm.news, What's Up Canada, or on Wimkin. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of it for a little while down the road, that's your advance warning, guys. So back to before, sorry for interrupting or not even letting you get started, Michelle, but yeah, I found a video. It disturbed me highly for days, and I sent it to you.
You did.
And the response was you were as equally disturbed by it as I was.
Well, yes, I definitely was. It's a very disturbing video, but I think mostly from my perspective, it is watching the development of trauma in action.
And there was so much of it, and thanks to the education, a lot of our community here is going to understand why we're dissecting this a little bit further down the road. But for me, the parallels and the understanding of trauma and the approach that they had taken in, first of all, a documentary that I never ever expected to see the likes of come to light of day, first of all, that astounded me, the subject matter that they had actually been brave enough to delve into, but through the limited lens that they were able to dissect the mechanics of what we're going to be talking about. And it's those mechanics I think that we needed to take a different lens on, yours being the trauma lens, and mine being kind of a bridge of all things, into shedding more onto that and bringing more context to it and understanding how it applies to today and the danger we are in of repeating history and thinking that we are invincible to it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a key factor, and or that we have been invincible to it. Because we've had a significant amount even since the Cold War, and with very little recognition of how this has all affected us.
Well, and I guess I suppose we should talk about what we're talking about. This video tonight, guys, is a documentary film that was put out very recently, and it was a group of psychologists and historians. Often we hear, uh, you know, in discussion about the turbulent times that we're in, and the history that we've known. We always look back at World War II in Germany and go, how did the German people allow that to happen? We would never let all of that happen here. That's the invincibility that I'm referring to, and we're going to delve into how literally a first world nation and society got turned into something that was almost unrecognizable as being, a part of the human race. These people in Germany were not uneducated, they were not ignorant, they were not savage, monsters, but they were turned into something that more resembles than what we think about as a functioning society. So that's the documentary that we're going to be unpacking. We've both watched it a couple of times, so this is kind of getting close down to the cue where we're going to actually start into watching this video, guys. This is kind of like a dinner and a movie, in a Saturday night fright night kind of way almost, but I think what we're going to be able to do is to help people recognize some of the patterns and understanding how and better to deal with the onslaught of stuff that we're having to deal with, and think that there is no other way, and recognizing that. So before we get into that, I'm going to pull up one of the comments that I found in this video because it's very relevant to why we're doing this. This is a very dark subject matter. And the words psyop and conspiracy theory and Nazi and fascist and all of these things get spread around, and we can't have any of the hard discussions. Well, tonight we're going to have one of the hardest discussions of all on it. But the reason for it is there's going to be people out there that are going to be outraged by the nature of this documentary that are missing the point. There's by no means excusing any of the horrific actions of the men and women. They're showing you how a massive group of otherwise normal people, mentally sound people, could make choices or end up in situations where they performed these murderous actions, right down to the scientific studies that show proof of herd mentality and obedience mentality. The point is to show that we are all capable of terrible things. It's the nature of the human being, the human condition. There are things that led to these people doing so. Um, and that was an incredibly succinct, point to make of this. Go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to say to that comment, it's a good comment, but there is accountability there. Like most people that are traumatized don't have the option of saying no to begin with, and they did. They do make that clear, but again, the military pressure, and so on. So there is accountability there that almost starts right at the beginning. But again, they explain why, but there gets to be a point where, yeah, it's something else again.
Yeah, where the inner uh, discussion or the inner debate about right, wrong, and otherwise, and they quickly get sorted out and removed from having to make those moral and ethical decisions, and the beast becomes more refined and more capable in its endeavors, and those are some of the things that I am mortified about moving forward, seeing happening in our society around us, and that those are the things that we have to guard ourselves from seeing, or recognizing, so that we can do something about making sure that it doesn't happen, because we're seeing that same separation of willingness and compliance, that is nurtured and grown, and all of those things nasty, and just to the beginning of the flick, and I'm going to pull it up here. We're going to discuss the opening quote, and at that point, guys, I'll drop links in the chat while we're discussing this opening quote, and then you'll have to get over on quick from Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter in order to carry on with the discussion. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not a believer in censorship, but I'm also not a believer in suicide. So I'm not committing digital suicide tonight. You'll have to get on over to one of these other platforms. So I'm going to bring this up, this first quote, because it's so incredibly profound that it's going to deserve some special discussion, and then we're gonna get into it. This first quote: "Monsters exist, but they are too few in number to be truly dangerous. More dangerous are the common men."
Mhm.
Thoughts on that, Michelle?
Wow, never a truer comment or never a truer quote. It's true, I think. Wow.
Well, it took one Hitler. It was the common man that did his bidding, and allowed themselves to become that that I can't even say it person, but allow themselves to succumb to the conditioning and whatever it took to carry on. That's the part that I think that we have to make sure never again represents, is that we, the common man, allow ourselves to become, so susceptible to the monster's bidding, and that's unfortunately one of those parallels that I see happening here in the trajectory that our country has taken. So on that note, guys, I've dropped some links in all of the chats. You'll have to start to catch the rest of this over in one of those other platforms. So I hope that we see you all over there real shortly, and we'll carry on the conversation. Yeah, Rumble is going to be safe, guys. This is only going to stop on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. It's still going to be good on Rumble, What's Up Canada, LGM.news, and Wimkin. So we'll get started.
Actually, I have to admit that at the time we did not give it much thought.
If it weren't for those silly thoughts about our activities in this country, I would have a wonderful time on this mission.
I've already told you about the shooting. Of course, I did not want to fail at this job either.
History in law and justice is being made. Judges representing the major powers, America, Britain, Russia, Nuremberg est aujourd'hui une ville ruinée. Nuremberg était l'orgueil du Troisième Reich. Dans son stade
Nürnberg, einst die Stadt der Parteitage, wird heute zur Stadt der Vergeltung.
s'est ouvert le procès géant des plus grands criminels de guerre, de ceux qui ont préparé le massacre.
War crimes, nicht schuldig. Crimes against humanity. Nicht schuldig im Sinne der Anklage. The killing of defenseless civilians, nicht schuldig. Persecutions on political, racial and religious grounds. Nicht schuldig. Extermination. Nicht schuldig im Sinne der Anklage. Genocide. Nicht schuldig. Murder. Nein, nicht schuldig.
And when I got to Nuremberg, as a prosecutor by chance, but we found the Einsatzgruppe and the Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR, reports from the Eastern Front. Clear case of mass murder, unparalleled in human history. 3,000 men, the men you're talking about, went out and every day, they murdered large numbers of people, including helpless, innocent children.
To fathom evil, a series of tests were conducted with the defendants during the Nuremberg trials. The Rorschach test. A subject is shown cards with ink block patterns and asked to interpret the images. The psychiatrist analyzes the subject based on these interpretations. The results from Nuremberg are too disturbing to be published. The Nazi criminals who were tested are psychologically sound and completely normal men.
The notion that mass killers are wild beasts, which exists among many of the public, kill them all. These are wild animals. How could they do such a thing? Is absolutely false. The mass killers are people just like you and me who are doing what they think is necessary for the general welfare.
To this day, I can remember Major Trapp pacing back and forth with his hands on his back. He somehow seemed depressed. Essentially, he said, "Hell, operations like these are not my kind of thing. But orders are orders."
He announced we had to carry out an execution in the village ahead and made it very clear that it was Jews we were meant to kill. During his speech, he reminded us to think of our wives and children at home who were suffering from the air raids. In particular, we should think about all the women and children who had lost their lives during the bombing raids. Thinking about these facts would make it easier to carry out our orders during the operation ahead.
Major Trapp said the operation was not at all to his liking, but he had received the order from way up.
I asked myself how it was possible that civilians were shot. Today, I can't remember in detail what was said about that matter. No one dared to say anything. Inwardly, I did not agree. We stood there as white as snow.
At the end of his speech, the major asked the older soldiers in the battalion whether there were any among them who didn't feel up to carrying out the mission. At first, no one had the courage to speak up. Finally, I was the only one who stepped forward, thus indicating that I was one of those not being fit for the job. After that, other comrades came forward as well. There were about 10 to 12 of us.
We were instructed insofar as we could refuse the order to participate in special operations without any adverse consequences.
Everyone must have heard that you were allowed to step forward because I heard it too.
I must admit that I didn't have the guts to refuse the order.
It is peer pressure to the nth degree. You're separated from home. You're separated from everyone else. There is nobody but you and your unit. You don't go home at the end of the day and go back to your family. You don't read the morning newspaper and take the commute to work. This is your life. These people are everything. And if you fail them, they will die. And if they fail you in combat, they will die. And so here we are, bound to degrees beyond what most people can comprehend. The brotherhood of war. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers.
That's a sorry, I gotta, before we get too far along, so many things that I want to digest in there. And there was a comment that came up here about Operation Paperclip, and the Nuremberg trials being a farce. And there was only 2,000 German officers and people that were held to account at the Nuremberg trials, and more than 200,000 that then became part of diasporas that were then dispersed, um, transplanted, shall we say, throughout mostly the Commonwealth, because they didn't go to Russia. The ones that went to Russia didn't make it out of Russia for the most part. So some points that I wanted to touch on there, but it's interesting that that's where they started with this.
It is also when he said about the peer pressure and it was their life and their comradeship, and you often find that in militaries, police forces, and so on. The unfortunate reality is no matter how difficult it was, it is also the point of accountability. They could say no, and that's
Yep.
that's sad. That's the unfortunate part.
It is, and about 10 out of that battalion did say no, and they'll carry on a little bit more with that. But that's one of the filters, that's military 101. They want to breed that brotherhood, that unquestioning loyalty, and this is, exactly what they've created and done here now in modern day military forces. This is where we see the assault on that, the filtering now with the what I call the alphabet soup brigade becoming the next filter on who is going to be the most loyal in the military services in some of these places. So these patterns are still repeating.
Well, and to ask ourselves, I don't know, in light of all kinds of things that we've just seen throughout the course of this, ask ourselves, I don't know, could our military and police forces and so on turn on their own people simply because somebody ordered them to?
We want to think that there's no way that they could, and that was the one of the, for me, the things that rocked me about this, and we talked about this before deciding to do this. When I look at my own life and my own lens in watching this now at 55, this was incredibly poignant and understanding and connecting of all of the dots. And I look back, and my first question is, holy forgive me, Lord, because had I been one of those 18-year-old soldiers at that point in time when they were given the option to say no based on the peer pressure and the culture that they lived in that point in time, I can't guarantee that at that point I might have said no. Without having experienced it yet, without having understanding it yet, but understanding that culture. And at that time, it was a very romanticized concept of being a soldier and going to war. It was part of the journey to manhood, right? And it gave you creds as a man, right? In that day and age. So it was a social and cultural thing, of value and significance, and a choice that they were making. But at the end of the day, this is where we can't overlook the fact they had that choice. And there's people in our orbits right now that have those exact same choices. This is the point where we are at moving forward. This is where those people are at making those choices, whatever choices that they make.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, I'll carry on.
It's an unpleasant task that all of them have to do. I can refuse, but if I refuse, then all my friends and colleagues, they have to do more of it. So I think we can look back and wish that every man there had said, no, I'm not going to do it, and all had refused. And then who knows what would have happened. But no one wants to step forward and say, well, I'm too good for this, the rest of you better do it.
One could say, I am unable to do this, with the implication it's one's own shortcoming, and one might be quickly transferred because they didn't want to interfere with the killing machinery. One could never say, I'm against this, it's wrong, I condemn you. That would be a death knell.
I was worried that it might be bad for me in the future if I appeared to be too soft. I didn't want others to get the impression I was not as tough as a man is supposed to be.
I had to worry Leidowitz and the others would think I was a wimp.
I assumed that if I asked him to be exempted from executions, I would have been on his blacklist and my promotion would have been at risk or totally out of the question.
A commander who would have presented himself as being too soft for this sort of thing certainly would have disqualified himself for any duties of leadership.
Well, I must admit that nobody wanted to be seen as a coward.
I thought I would be able to cope with the matter, and with or without me, the Jews would not be able to escape their fate.
For us policemen, the motto was, what benefits the state is just, what harms the state is unjust.
I got to pause there for just a second. It's okay because they would not have been able to escape their fate.
Yeah, yeah. I know, but how old would you suppose some of these kids are, Wayne?
At this time going into the services, the average age would have been of rank and file probably between 19 to 23. In that neighborhood, they would have been in the groups that carried this out. They would have been primarily, had some degree of formal, not just high school but advanced education. Most of them would have. These were, where this all started and originated. When you follow the process of it, these were, the comparables to almost America's West Point. In their development. So.
I would have said roughly the same thing, but just to bear in mind while you're watching this, that cognitive part of the brain, the frontal lobe, where we think about long-term consequences and problem solve and philosophize and so on, it is not fully developed until we're 25 years old. So there are certain areas you can't access if you don't have them.
That's a huge point, and that's why they want them. These young men at primarily that age, because they've gotten a certain amount of education level, which is basically training. So they understand their capabilities coming in, and where the boundaries of programming are effective. I mean, that is the whole point of the discipline and the culture that is constructed. The first job of being when you join the military is for them to break you down and then rebuild you in their required or desired image. So that's why they want them at that point. And those that excel or have higher education end up in the officer echelons. At this time, still money could get you into officer candidacy and those kinds of things. It was still quite autocratic with the influence and political status and class and those kinds of things. But by World War II, that a lot of that had it was mostly middle class, slightly higher educated.
Exactly.
Perfect universal soldiers for what they had in mind. And we'll get to that.
What I'm trying to say is that it never crossed my mind that the orders might be wrong.
I followed those orders because they came from the leaders of our country, not because I was scared.
I know it is the duty of the police to protect innocent people, but at the time I was convinced that Jewish people were not innocent, but guilty.
Today I can no longer say what I thought at the time or if I thought anything at all. I can't say if I was influenced by the propaganda to refuse to carry out the order I had received.
I must say that we didn't think about it at all at the time. Only years later did you really become aware of what happened back then.
That's important.
And so is this one here. I'll go first just because I interrupted you.
Yeah.
I may as well burn it up. But Hitler and his cronies believed that they were part of the master race, or for they dehumanized those they deemed inferior or the Untermenschen. Sorry, forgive my German butchery, but this is one of the other things that I see playing out right now in the conflict in Ukraine and in the Middle East. In Ukraine, they're orcs, and you know, it's just that's what is so dangerous.
If you noted what he said, it wasn't until years later that we realized what had happened there. That is really important because, and you'll see why later on. I'll bring it up again, but just keep that comment in mind, because even though it was a brief comment, it is really important comment.
It's been weaponized for the fighting class in every war. They dehumanized their enemy. We called them Huns. The Japanese were, the dirty Japs. Both sides did it. Everybody did it. And that's something to consider. War is ugly and dirty from both sides. No side is um, ultimately righteous. They both did horrible, horrible, horrible things. And for the context of this video, yes, we're focusing on one set of atrocities committed by one military and analyzing what we can document through this documentary. These are things that we have to look inwardly on in all of our nations, because there is so much guilt and accountability on our own sides that we refuse to take a look at the lens of through those. But this is what's available to us. We need to make those parallels. Otherwise, we're going to do the exact same thing.
They knew, Wayne, what was going on over there and did nothing to stop it.
100%.
Fully aware. So, I mean, if you want, if they contributed to it by refusing to step in and stop this.
Yeah. So carry on.
Means the idea never occurred to me that you should refuse or evade the orders to participate in the extermination of the Jews. I'd never learned anything else but to unconditionally obey orders I was given.
God heavens, damn it. One generation has to bear the burden so that our children will have a better life.
Now that's somebody that's a little bit older that sees that transition. And one point that I wanted to make here is there's nobody born since 1982 that can understand or fathom a world without an avatar universe, the internet, cell phones, and computers. So that has become the governing reality for anybody born since 1982. And this is a major bridge in, so many of us probably watching this are in the age group going, oh shoot, and exactly like this guy.
The Asch conformity experiment. A subject is led into a room where a group of people are already waiting. The subject is told that the others are volunteers as well. In reality, they are actors. The group is shown a line on a card with 3 comparison lines alongside it. The task is to estimate which lines are of the same length. As arranged, the actors unanimously give wrong answers to some of the exercises. On the average, 37% of the subjects agree with the obviously incorrect answer.
Is this every day, all day, in all of our educational system? Just curious.
Yeah.
In psychology, we tend to depict conformity as a bad thing in situations like this, where many people are killed and should have thought for themselves to act differently. But in the bigger picture, conformity is mostly a benefit, is mostly a good thing. Humans, we evolved to survive and reproduce by banding together in groups and working together and sharing projects and sharing responsibilities. So conforming to the group is a way to be accepted in the group. It is vitally important to humans, especially back in the evolutionary past, to be accepted in the group, to be part of it. If you're alone, you have very little chance of surviving.
Conformity is a tricky word because it does mean, in some degree, the necessary structures that one must be part of and adhere to in any society or culture. And it also has the implication of obedience to that which exists.
Certainly for Eastern Poland and the western parts of the Soviet Union, this is the demographic center of European Jewry. And many of these towns in the territories that the Germans occupy after June 1941, the towns will be over half Jewish.
One day I asked somebody in Lviv where were living the Jews. And people, they laugh and say, where were living the non-Jews? And we didn't realize effectively in Western Ukraine, what's called Yiddish land, Jews were not in a small corner. There was not a street of Jews. They were among the people. There were factories, there were opera, there were spectacles, there were restaurants. They were a people in the people. And so for us it's very difficult to imagine because we classify Jews as a minority.
Расстаемся, я не стану злиться. Виноват и в этом ты и я. Утомленное солнце нежно с морем прощалось.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on Mo.
I guess I couldn't get the recording without the commercials. So yeah, we'll have to, yeah.
Ideological training was also carried out. I remember that the relationship of Jewry to Bolshevism was taught as a subject. By the way, the movie Yud Süß was shown to the battalion in Radom.
One of the things that makes it real easy for me is removing the whatever noun that they're replacing, and this is a key point, you're replacing, making Jewry and Bolshevism interchangeable, and it's the ideology of the mechanics behind it. Is that, that's something that stands out to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also, as you'll see later, with trauma, there's often a need to defend the behavior in some way, and it will always be through altruism.
Exactly.
We drove off to take a look at the city of Kishinev in daylight. Now we were able to see the scale of destruction, ruins upon ruins, rubble upon rubble, misery and squalor. A once flourishing city had been turned into one gigantic ruin.
In Kiev, for example, there's one explosion after another, caused by mines. The city has been burning for 8 days. The Jews did it all.
The Jews and the Bolsheviks, mainly the Jews, had destroyed everything.
Der größte Teil dieser feigen Bestien sind Juden, von denen jeder ungezählte Mordart im Gewissen hat.
Recently, one of our comrades was found murdered at night in the forest. He was stabbed in the back. It must have been the Jew.
The snipers are really dangerous. Yesterday, a commander of an SS regiment was shot. They say the murderer was a Jew.
You can imagine how something like that cries out for revenge. But then again, it is also carried out.
Hat uns Gelegenheit gegeben, das Judentum an seiner Niststätte kennenzulernen. Der Jude ist
It must be the Jew who is behind all this. He wants to destroy us and afterwards reign over the ruins of the world. That must not happen no matter what.
He doesn't seem like a fighter. Instead, he stirs up hatred in the background, pulls all the strings, and that's why he's difficult to fight. In the process, he exploits all means and all people. It doesn't matter if they are Catholic.
This is hard for me to listen to because this is exactly how the Canadian government and the liberal propaganda mercenary media describes us. Exactly the same way. Exactly this, like verbatim almost on how they're describing us right here, right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Terrifying. That makes my blood freeze.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we're doing this, folks.
Bolsheviks, Protestants.
We know that all those crooks are Freemasons and therefore devoted to, or to put it in a better way, slaves of international Jewry. What a shame that I couldn't join this operation against these scoundrels. It would have been a joy to see my machine gun smoking.
We cannot and must not lose this war, because then we Germans would be hopelessly lost. The Jews will assail us and eradicate everything that is German. There would be a horrific and gruesome massacre.
Their guilt is overwhelming. The suffering they cause is staggering. Their murders are diabolical. It can only be atoned for by their destruction. I used to reject this attitude as being immoral. But after this presentation of the Soviet paradise, I cannot see any other solution.
To deal with the situation appropriately, one completely eliminates personal feelings of any kind by carrying out the work ruthlessly and without mercy.
This struggle must be fought to the utmost and must be fought to the bitter end. Then the world will find eternal peace.
There's only one thing for the Jews: extermination.
This is the alphabet army right now. How they see us through the lens of the alphabet army. How dare you want to protect your children from us? You must be exterminated. Exactly the same language again.
Also, we're the saviors of the world. We're the saviors of the world, and so same thing.
Yeah, they're willing to be the martyr to save the world, to protect trans rights. This is a on par, same level programming in my assessment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Many genocides have long historic conflict behind them. The Tutsis and the Hutus in Burundi had earlier conflicts, and certainly in Rwanda. And one can see that there was an inherent conflict between Armenians wanting more and more autonomy and the Turks losing other parts of their empire, feeling that they had to draw their line somewhere. That is, these are not fantasized conflicts. They don't justify genocide, but they are not fantasized conflicts. The conflict of the Third Reich against the Jew is a totally imaginary conflict. This is just made up as a fantasy of Hitler's imagination and of others. And it's that utter disparity between the Jews, for the most part, who certainly in Germany were the most loyal of Germans imaginable, and the harmlessness of the Jewish populations elsewhere to what was attributed to them and what was done to them seems to me starker and more disparate than almost any genocide I can think of.
And I call it a biomedical vision on the part of the Nazis. And that biomedical vision said, and Hitler wrote this in Mein Kampf, and it was picked up in other ways, the Nordic race had been strong and dominant and is the only culture-creating race. All other races, except the, quotes, Jewish race, are culture-sustaining races, possibly, but can't create culture. And, quotes, the Jewish race, so-called, was a culture-destroying race, which had infected the Nordic race, rendered it weak, and therefore had to be destroyed. So the whole project was a healing project, and in a way, even the invasion by armies and the case for living space, I think, is all secondary to this biological vision or fantasy. And there takes part a reversal of healing and killing, because you are killing to heal. You kill the Jews or other inferior races in order to heal the Nordic race.
that the parallels to our current pharma capture and the replacement of treatment with MAID, if the parallels don't send chills down everybody's spine, I guess they're in the wrong watch party. Sorry.
Well, if you look at this and then you say, okay, at the maids, as well as the fact that we have those in the transplant industry patting themselves on the back that Canada has the highest ratio of transplants from MAIDS patients. Now, this is something that should, we're heroes. This saves lives. Isn't, it's incredible. This should be investigated, not applauded.
They'll balance the budget through harvesting our organs. That's literally how they see it, and to them, they're saving the world doing exactly that. So it's something I just wanted to add on to here. Comment here by DCW. Yes, we see you, by the way. The hippie movement. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was 1926. The first attempted trans surgery happened in Germany. Yes, during that time frame of almost like we got now.
Well, the destructive savior complex as well, and especially when it comes to minorities and so on. I mean, in this country, you can see they've made a mess of just about everything they've touched. All you have to do is look at residential schools and the blacks and so on. They don't even waste a second looking back through the dust at the mess they caused before they're on to their next savior issue, and they never quit. And they they simply won't mind their own business. And even when the people that they're claiming that they're helping are telling them stop.
Well,
they'll claim they know what's best for them.
Joe Biden's proclamation last fall about the transition to a transhumanist economy, how that didn't become world-stopping news is almost beyond me, because we're seeing exactly the extension of the economy and the drivers that were happening then being taken over here now, and it's completely off the board as far as for anything that we can fathom, and this is what makes us so dangerous to them.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Triumphant in Poland, triumphant in France, blessed with victory, flushed with victory. It's madness to think that everything I know and everybody I know is wrong. My nation, the people who raised Hitler to power, the Nazi Party, my armed forces, my leadership, all of them are wrong.
There's a kind of enormous triumphalism, and that triumphalism can carry you into a realm of transcendence. One is omnipotent, and the killing can feed that and also be fed by it. There's always an attraction also to killing. There's an attraction to war because it removes one from what might be called the banalities of everyday life.
I just wanted to take a second there, and he's almost sarcastically emphasizing the gaslighting, the astroturfing, that we all experience and feel. How could we be wrong because we don't want to, because everybody else is having such victory? That was the COVID, in a nutshell, exactly how they weaponize that projection and propaganda and power of triumph in gaslighting the entire unsuspecting population.
There might be a slight difference is that, and only that I am quite sure that the Germans believed what they were doing.
Yeah.
You know, but the people that were pushing this nonsense on us, I'm not sure they did.
True story. I have to agree with you on that one. I think that there was the majority did not. They just were part and parcel of more of what we're going to get into. I'll carry on.
Our battalion physician had to explain how to fire to induce the immediate death of the victim. I remember vividly how he traced the outline of a human body, at least from the shoulders up, for the demonstration, and then precisely described the point where the fixed bayonet should be placed as a guide.
That training is exactly what they are waiting on to get through the medical system to before they expand the MAID program. If you listen to Mark Holland's announcement, that's what they're waiting on. Is not enough people are in alignment yet. Too many people are saying no, so they have to wait till they get more of that conditioning through the medical training.
Yeah,
exactly that. Exactly that.
My heart was in my mouth, and I was trembling so badly I found it difficult to aim. When the other comrades shot at the Jews lying on the ground, I did it too. Standing about 2 meters behind my victim, I aimed at the neck and fired.
I personally took part in about 10 shootings. I had to kill men and women. Then I just couldn't fire at people anymore. My squad leader noticed because at the end I kept missing. For that reason he replaced me. Other comrades were also replaced sooner or later because they just couldn't go on.
When I had to fire at these defenseless people for the first time, I thought of home, my children, because there were also children among those people.
I was among the marksmen too, but I was only able to fire about 5 times. I began to feel sick.
Yeah, here's where it's really important, Wayne, is that we have a process when someone is traumatized this badly. We have where they dissociate. It's the only way they can deal with it. And so a definition, well, you can have depersonalization, which is sort of your thoughts, feelings, you're disconnected from your thoughts, feelings in your body. But with more important is derealization in situations which is caused by such extreme stress, anxiety situations, and that is a disconnection from your surroundings and your environment. Everything seems surreal. It's like you're being in a dream or you're watching somebody else do it. And when somebody is traumatized by this high stress, the only way they could have coped with this is through that. They had to have left, they had disconnected, from everything. Now, what happens with dissociative behavior like that, all of a sudden they're emotionally numb. They're kind of robot-like. They feel like they're observing themselves from outside the body. They feel like they're living in a dream world. It starts to become, the more they do it, every time they do it, the more they dissociate from the circumstance. And one of the symptoms can be, somebody might say, well, I used to be really good at this particular skill, and I I don't know why, but I can't do it anymore. I mean, these people, these gentlemen were crack shots. Suddenly they're missing. They can't function anymore. They are dissociating. You can have physical symptoms, vomiting, all of this kind of thing. So you're looking at such a traumatic situation for them that they're now traumatized. At what exact point we actually dissociate when we're that traumatized is questionable, but you're seeing it happen as we're watching. They're dissociating, and that will become really clear in a few minutes in this film, that these men dissociated. And the fact that, if you go back to when I said pay attention to the remark about we didn't realize, what really happened for years after. Well, when someone is traumatized, it creates almost like that. It creates almost like a barrier. And it's roughly, well, give or take, depending on the person and the circumstance, roughly 30 years before those trauma barriers are breaking down and reality is setting in.
Now, this, what we're going over here right now was actually quite documented post Vietnam War with American troops. Similar things, so for just to use that as a little bit of context, there was two sides of history, apparently, by our understanding, good guys and bad guys, where when we're looking at specifically through the lens of the military and the effect on the soldiers. But what I see happening right now is, to a lesser degree, this same patterning, the same trauma pattern is now being imprinted in the people that go out and protest, as well as the same behavior pattern being imprinted into the policing services that have now escalated their expectations of what is required from them to govern these feral, dangerous Canadians right now. We're watching this escalation happening exactly the same as it did there.
Exactly. Well, if you also go back to the film that they're constantly pounding at them, the brain will find ways of justifying that behavior. And it's almost always altruistic. We think kids should be mutilated because we're the ones who are trying to save them from suicide. Well, not to mention the fact that if a child is traumatized, you always run the risk of having suicide ideation there. It's the trauma that causes suicide. It's not whether we allow that child to be mutilated or not. So you're running, suicidal risk if a child is traumatized. Well, that's not going to be discussed because that's not part of the agenda. And so, but it's always altruistic. Everything that was done to, for example, in residential schools was justified through altruism. And so you're seeing the same thing here. We tend to think that we're immune. We keep saying never again. And yet here we are. Are you kidding?
And that lens of altruism of the day for the atrocities has such a factor on how they actually come to exist, is through the lenses of that. So it's difficult to look back and with such a access to being able to do something like this. There should be a whole lot more of it, because this is the parallels to today. We're not immune. We're so not immune.
Nobody is. And when you see in our newspapers, doctors and supposedly well-educated people patting themselves on the back for Canada being the highest in the country for organ transplants from maids. And you see that, and they're saying, look at the lives we're saving. And everybody's going, oh yeah, look at nobody's talking about the ones you're killing. You can't trade lives. It's like,
well, they're using that same altruistic justification that how many trans kids were saving by carving them up.
Exactly.
By putting them on hormone blockers, all of those things. It's that exact same altruism. And that's the thing that people aren't being able to connect the dots. Either they're not aware of what we're looking at here, and being able to connect and recognize those same patterns, it's all interchangeable. It's like Lego blocks and language and programming. And at the end of the day, it's the same people profiting from World War One, World War II, every last war along the way, and the next one too.
People right in this country were perfectly willing to corral anyone who didn't have a vaccine into a concentration camp and line them up and shoot them because they are a threat to,
Well,
we're saving society and they are a threat to society. Fear.
As testified by my guests on Thursday, their living experience in law enforcement to go from being a shift commander to being threatened with a mental incarceration for not taking part in the program. That's the leverage as a police officer that they received. That's not even an 18-year-old kid that's signed on the bottom line to give his body to the government.
Exactly. And this particular documentary, I know most of your listeners are perfectly well aware that some of this is happening right in this country, and they see it happening and so on. But this video is literally showing it happening, and that's why it's so disturbing.
Yes, because and that was the point of doing this, is taking so many pauses along the way to give everybody a shake and say, do you see it now? Do you see it now? And this is not to be condescending to anybody out there. We're hoping to give you guys a tool that you can pull up later on and say to somebody, do you see it now?
Yeah, in just a minute here too, you're going to get a very quick look at just how deep that dissociation goes, how deeply they dissociated from what was happening.
Dissociation is a powerful marker point for the controllers. They like that disassociation.
Absolutely.
It was like in a dream. During the shooting, I felt so sick I had to throw up. Afterwards, they laughed at me because I wasn't able to shoot anymore. What are we doing? What are we doing?
There was no way to avoid some of my comrades noticing that I didn't go along with the execution and fire shots at the victims. As a result, they made comments about me like bastard, gutless, and so on.
Killing the man was so abhorrent to me that it did not hit the fourth man. It was simply no longer possible for me to aim accurately. I was suddenly filled with nausea and ran away from the execution site. I then ran into the forest. I had to throw up and sat against a tree. I think I spent about 2 to 3 hours alone in the forest.
What we had to experience was much too much for a human being. When the layers grew higher, we had to walk on the corpses. Our boots were besmirched with blood. It was gruesome to feel the dead bodies under your boots.
We are expected to deal with this awful mess. We are soldiers and want to fight in battle, but not carry out this.
It was horrible.
This is probably what's going through the minds of, I would suggest, up to 80% of law enforcement in the military right now, in the today, not tomorrow, in the right here, right now. They're chasing us around online for all of exactly these kinds of things, and that's not what they signed up for. And then they wonder why recruitment is at all-time lows. Pretty much explains it.
Yeah.
After that execution, I had time off, 3 to 4 hours. During that period, alcohol was served, rum, I believe. Each marksman received roughly quarter liter of alcohol. The alcohol was just enough to overcome a certain feeling of nausea.
Upon our return, I still remember that none of my comrades enjoyed our meal, but instead we consumed plenty of alcohol, which we received in special rations.
It seemed like the men were totally exhausted. That evening I went through the barracks again and talked to individual members of the company. Some people were no longer approachable, especially those who had been deployed as marksmen in the 4th platoon. I thought about it and came to the conclusion that the whole thing was a real disgrace. I felt bitter about the fact that we had become pigs and murderers, especially since we had been trained to be decent human beings in the barracks.
We had to do the dirty work.
Deep in my heart, I had been an officer, namely an officer who upheld the ideals of the old Prussian tradition. My world fell apart.
And from that point on, they're trapped. Because the more horrific acts they commit, the more they are invested in believing that their leaders are right and their nation is right. You have to believe what I did was right, what I did was proper. And you wait for punishment. I mean, over your shoulder, you're saying, there must be punishment coming. I've committed this evil act. There must be punishment from somewhere. But the punishment never comes. And everybody says what you did was right.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, I don't think of these as impersonal historical happenings. Rather, I see them as real events mediated by human beings just like you and me. How is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience?
The Milgram experiment. A subject is asked to give electric shocks to punish another participant, in reality an actor, for false answers. The intensity of the electric shock is meant to be increased after each mistake. An experimenter gives orders. At a certain point, the supposed victim screams in pain and begs to stop the experiment. If the subject has any doubts about what he is doing, the experimenter initially says, "Please continue." Then, the experiment requires that you continue. Then, it is absolutely essential that you continue. Then, you have no choice, you must go on. All subjects go beyond the point where they hear loud screams, when the victim starts begging, when the victim suddenly no longer responds. 67% of the participants give the supposed learner electric shocks of maximum strength, which they know could be deadly.
It's an incremental process by which perpetrators do more and more step by step. There's a shocking beginning. That's like an introduction to the whole process, an initiation. And then incrementally one takes one step after another so that one couldn't have taken a full plunge into the extremity.
Once they had crossed the threshold, then the emotional reaction to what they're doing becomes increasingly less traumatic, increasingly more routine, and that while they could describe their feelings and their reaction to the first massacre, as one goes further into the killing, they remember fewer and fewer details. They can't keep the different massacres apart.
Human beings really are designed psychologically to adapt to things. So extreme experiences, we grow accustomed to them and they become more routine. It is surprising how far it went with, you'd think that killing someone would always continue to be troubling and upsetting.
That, in a sense, to me, is one of the scariest things I found in my research, was how quickly people became used to what they were doing, how quickly it became normal.
How many people still stand 6 feet apart everywhere?
Exactly. Also, they talk about normalization. I think that's only a part of it, because I know that when people are traumatized that badly, every time they go to do it again, they simply dissociate again.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they deal with it.
Things weren't that strict. They ask, who wants to shoot? We need some guys. Usually a few members of the second company volunteered by stepping forward or raising their hand and saying someone has to do it.
Later on, after the men had gotten used to the bloodbath, there were always enough volunteers.
Not being able to see dead people is a weakness that is best overcome by going there more often. It then becomes a habit.
The last day of September gave us sunny weather again. We marched in a long line into a beautiful valley, framed on both sides by colorful autumn forests. The light brown meadows lay along the broad stream, flowing over large stones and boulders.
I would say the fact that I am a good person, I am a normal person, these make it possible for me to do these bad things. It is not that you split your personality. I'm just another person who's leading a normal life, doing a dirty job, and these normal things empower me. And they are symbols that my society says what I'm doing is right. They are indicators, tokens, manifestations of the support of my civilization for what I do. This is not a dichotomy in which you split your life in two parts. It is the yin and the yang. It is the one supporting the other and making the other possible.
We usually marched out as a platoon, combed the village by going.
Question for you there, Michelle. He describes the yin and the yang, making the other possible. What are some of the things we might consider that we do that make it possible for them to do what they do? If that's the case, is it in continuously in how I see that is how we respond and react and deal to with their traumatic responses and their programming and their conditioning. The more adamant we are in how we resist that, allows them to get more and more diabolical in their own justification to save the world.
Well, when he was talking about, how the more you do it, the more you, well, that's sort of the definition of boiled like frogs.
Right.
And so as generations go along, we accept more. Something else is always on the horizon that's worse than the last thing, and so we've normalized the last thing and focused on this new thing, and then that something else comes along that's worse, and that becomes normalized, and we there are many things sort of at the base, I think, of this pyramid that we haven't recognized, and also that I'm not sure, look, if you give people a test, and they will almost always rate themselves as good people. Well, obviously, it feels good to rate yourself as a good person, but that is largely due to the fact that we compare. Well, guess what? The guy down the street is a jerk, and I don't do what he does, so therefore I'm a good person. But the problem is the yardstick that we actually judge ourselves as good people is now rapidly changing to, if I can call something evil good, I can now rank myself. If I convince someone to kill themselves, I can rank myself as the highest of humanitarians.
This same psychosis, it lives every day in our digital space. A person may be an absolute scumbag, but they've got 1 million followers on Instagram, so they must be good. They're automatically good, because that is the measuring stick, that they are measured as good as evil. So which is wrong? The person that's the fraud on there that's rated good because the measuring stick is broken, or this is the dichotomy that we actually face.
Well, they have taken a bunch of young men, and the measuring stick in terms of the world is taking something evil and convincing them it is good. And so therefore they can rate really highly. They're getting all kinds of accolades for what they're doing. Now you can see
raises, promotions, extra schnapps.
Exactly. So, and you saw how the people, just thought they were fabulous and so on. They're saving the world. They now have an altruistic reason for not realizing that the yardstick by which they're measuring themselves is broken. It's evil. It's not correct. That's not how you measure yourself as to whether you're a good person or not. And so so the measuring stick has changed for them, but also with that trauma as well, you're getting that's part of it. I mean, I knew somebody who moved regular clockwork every 8 months, and I'm trying to convince this woman. She said slight response, and every time, well, it was the landlord's fault. No, it's a guy downstairs' fault. No, it's this, and I say, no, you're in flight response. And you know what I mean. So you have this. It clearly it feels good to rank ourselves as good people. That it's not a split, as in split personality, like he sort of described. That happens in childhood, not in adulthood, by the way. That normally, but anyone can dissociate, and that's not the same thing as
These are barely more than kids. They're barely out of childhood for the most part. The primary people that are doing this, and I don't want to bring up this other comment here just before we carry on again, and differentiate all of these things that you're addressing here in this comment are actual things, yes, but what they are is the basically the creations of the diaspora. We're talking here about how all of those people that got shipped around the world through lockstep, all of those things, how and why they became something to be wary of. We're talking we're talking the factory zone for all of those kinds of diabolical, creations that were unleashed across the planet.
well, I think probably one of the most offensive statements to human beings by and large is to simply say you're not a good person.
That's enough to do it.
Yeah, you'd swear to God the end of the world just came.
Yeah. All right.
Going from door to door, brought out the entire population and drove them to the main square. With the support of a local, it was determined who was a Jew. Then the non-Jewish inhabitants were sent back.
We look for the right location for execution and burial. After a few minutes, we have found something. The condemned line up with spades to dig their own graves. 2 of them are crying. The others definitely show incredible courage. What must be going on in their minds at this very moment? I believe each of them has a little hope that they will not be shot.
We drove to the execution site around 4 o'clock in the morning. The killing took about 3 hours. Of course, we also had to fill the ditch. That was rather long. I think we were finished with everything at around 8 o'clock.
Most of the time is taken up by digging the ditches, whereas the shooting itself happens quickly. 100 men, 40 minutes.
It's strange. I don't feel anything at all. No mercy, nothing. That's the way it is, and that's that.
The moon came up. Single stars were shining. A bright fog hung in the meadows. The trees stood dark and gloomy.
Sleeping very deeply, I was suddenly woken up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Line up for an execution. Okay then, let's be executioner and grave digger again. Strange. You love fighting, but then you have to shoot down defenseless people.
Company party to celebrate the battalion's 2nd anniversary. Nice afternoon, but then unfortunately unpleasant building.
On the whole, I was shooting for roughly 1 or 2 hours. When asked how many Jews I killed, I cannot be exact. Perhaps 50 or 100. Can't remember.
Men, women, children, all wiped out. The Jews will be totally exterminated. Dear Heidi, don't start worrying about it. It has to be done.
I just want to throw out a question to everybody because I think it's really pertinent to what we've been experiencing in the last few years. What do you suppose would happen if you walked into those people, those men, and presented to them the truth about what they had really become?
They would mock you. They would laugh at you. They would be angry at you. They would want to inflict violence on you. All of those things. I was just As I was looking into that young kid's face there, as they were saying it must be done, I remember being, out on the front lines with Antifa kids that far away, and that same look and resolution and mindset of enforcing exactly that same ideology, and it was as chilling then as it is right now, seeing that on the screen for me.
Sure, you're not talking them out of anything.
No, not a chance, not a hope. They would exterminate you rather than listen to you and celebrate it. Yeah.
The executions must have lasted until roughly 5 or 6 in the evening. There was schnapps later.
That one gets me. That one sticks in my brain from the first time I watched it, because that is exactly how they celebrate after one of their takedowns of a protest or a rally or something. That's exactly how they think. Oh, there's schnapps later. Yeah, it's exactly that is here. It's here right now.
Cool. I know.
We were young soldiers at the time. We didn't think about why the Jews were being shot. In fact, we complained for the simple reason alone that we had to clean our weapons afterwards.
What is hard to grasp and hard to picture is that the killing went on day after day, village by village, town by town, in which units went from one place to another, and this was their day-to-day job.
What was difficult to understand is how these people could, they were young. We have pictures of killers who are very young. And they succeeded to stand during sometimes 2-3 years shooting everyday people. So that's really surprising.
This morning I learned we can write, and there's a good chance mail will actually be delivered. While listening to some amazingly sensual music, I'm now writing the first letter to my Trude. As I write this letter, we're told to get our things together. Firing squad with steel helmet and rifle, 30 rounds of ammunition. We just came back. 500 Jews stood in a line for execution. Beforehand, we went to see the murdered German airmen.
About 5 weeks ago, I put the first of 600 up against the wall. Since then, we've wiped out another 200 or so in a mopping up operation. Then, in another mission, about 1,000 more. And in between, in the last 8 days, I've had 2,000 Jews and 200 gypsies shot.
I just am processing, listening to the job clinics. And exactly the same process.
In accordance with the 1:100 ratio for brutally murdered German soldiers. Another 2,200, almost exclusively Jews, will be executed during the next 8 days. Well, that's everything but a nice job.
Waited all morning for our dentist. Only got treated in the afternoon. Had to have the filling replaced. The dentist works with the most primitive equipment, but it helps.
We sought to clear the prison by the end of each month, enabling us to report greater numbers to the command of operations in Mogiliev. I don't care much for killing defenseless people, even if they are only Jews. I prefer honest, open combat. Well then, good night, my dearest bunny.
Most of the murders are committed in the summer because mass graves cannot be dug in frozen earth. For example, Bibrica.
Вас вітає колишній бібрський міський голова Юрій Іваськів. Місто Бібрика по кількості населення є одним із найменших на Україні, але одночасно з тим воно має славну, багатовікову історичну традицію. До 1939 року місто нараховувало 5900 жителів. Із них 2000 українців, 2000 населення євреїв і 1850 населення було польської народності. Місто мало славні традиції, і місто надзвичайно мирно співіснували всі три конфесії. Життя процвітало, життя було насиченим.
Центр? Ну то що тут центр? Люди ходили, розумієте, торгували. Я би за той Галю, от вон було. Там було, розумієте, цей, можна сказати, буква О. Я вже розказав, розумієте. І дівкора був в магазині з однієї сторони, з другої сторони, а всередині був такий вхід.
Там була посуда, там була обув, там тканина була. Що хто хотів, там можна було. Тільки щоб на гроші було, то він себе там забезпечив.
Були євреї, такої були кравці. І мій батько вчився якраз. Євреї. Але було більше їх. І зараз один за другим всюди закривали. П'ятницю.
А ви розповідали, що в суботу євреї навіть не могли собі піч розпалити.
Так.
Я сам навіть розпалював.
Так.
Слухай, іди сюди. Що таке? Немає серця, розпалив.
Так.
Дав там 2 гроші. Такой 2 гроші тут було таке.
За нами знаходиться синагога. Всі вулиці, які прилягали до синагоги, в 42-му році були обнесені колючим дротом і було утворено гетто, в якому утримувалися декілька сотень євреїв.
Гетто починалося, тут є річка.
Will 15-minute cities require barbed wire? Just asking.
І зараз за річкою були витягнуті дроти. І дроти обтягували. Тут, де були єврейські будинки, то був обтягнутий дротами. Так само і в центрі міста, до тротуару. Вже ходити туди не можна було. Як ходив я до школи, то ходив кругом. Кругом гетто обходив.
Хтось з ваших колишніх там друзів, школи, були такі люди, що з вами вчилися?
Були хлопці молоді.
Один прекрасний день, розумієте, був, розумієте, рано, я йшов до сестри, то сестра моя жила. Правда, вивели, розумієте, колону і до
They failed you in combat.
Oops, sorry.
That's okay. I wanted to ask you, did we want to give everybody like a 5-minute bathroom break?
That might be an idea, yeah.
Pretty heavy stuff for the brain, so I'm just wondering if just a bit of a breather might be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. We can take a little bit of a pause and let everybody go in. I kind of jumped, hit the wrong button and kind of jumped where we were at, but I'll find that here. I'll pull something up for everybody, and we'll take a little bit of a breather and readjourn here back in 4 or 5 minutes. So
I think I suggested that more for myself than anything.
no worries. We'll see you back here in a few, Michelle.
Okay.
Wow. It's going to take me interesting. Yeah, throw some comments up there, guys. Let's have a little bit of a chat here while I'm trying to figure out where I messed up and unplugged the video in the wrong spot. Let's see here. Don't need barbed wire with today's direct energy weapons. I'm afraid you're right with that. Let's see. FEMA camps are in my mind absolutely that. You know, the modern day word salad wrapping were for voluntary quarantine camps, FEMA camps, all of them, 100%. You're going to be 100% surveilled through every last bit of it. Uh, it just be you'll just be turned off when you go outside your designated zone, for sure. Uh, the parallels that I saw with this, and every time I watch it again, it's just unnerving, to me, because it's not just one thing. It's I see this behavior being repeated through so many of the agencies, police enforcement, the anti-us and establishment, the everything Europhobe group, the left literally is, the radical left is literally that extreme and committed, 100% pot committed to what they believe is necessary to save the world. These eco terrorists. I mean, look at how far Extinction Rebellion went. Just before the trucker convoy, how far did they go to shut down our country and the damage that they did to our economy with exactly that level of conviction? So every time you hear somebody calling you a Nazi, understand where that is coming from, because they've flipped the dial, right? And they are verbatim every time they, in as for example, in this documentary, they are 100%, convicted and pot committed to exterminating the Jews and the Bolsheviks. The same thing, just that's interchangeable with Christians and transphobes. Now, those are the replacement targets. Every bit of propaganda that the Germans engaged in creating these soldiers is almost verbatim, like I say, interchangeable like Lego blocks. Jews, Christians, Jews, white nationalists, transphobes. We are the enemy, and they look at us through exactly the same context. It should be no surprise when Trudeau's Sunshine Barbie says, we just scream what we want often enough, loud enough, and the lie becomes a truth. That's how they maintain this power and control over the disconnected.
Well, you'll also see with evil of Wayne, it is there are certain characteristics of it that are kind of standard, and that's well, it's very parasitical. It's highly cowardly. But the interesting thing about it is those that perpetrate when truth starts coming to light, they will say, "I never said that," and they will make sure that the victim carries the blame for whatever has happened. And so and that's fairly standard. But somebody had mentioned MK Ultra, and so on. And back then, before the age of 9, you can split someone's personality, or they have a concept of their spiritual self, their self. You can split them, and so they did all kinds of things to split those children. So, but what you're seeing here, anyone can dissociate. And that's exactly what we saw happen that first time out. We saw them, he said this, it didn't feel real. It didn't feel real. And so that dissociation and also those barriers take a long time to break down. And that's why I had said from the beginning of COVID, don't think this is stopping when
Yep.
the sex stops. It is not stopping. Trauma does not work like that.
I want to touch on this comment here. The label things and that disassociation. These labels are the wedge issues that they use, and then it's like when you watch the railroaders pinging a spike in, boom, 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 and now you're implanted. It's nailed in. You are the danger based on that particular wedge issue. So every time there's a label attached to you, that is exactly that. It's a wedge issue that they will hammer and hammer and hammer on to drive to disconnect you, and because that it reinforces their disconnect. They've achieved it again. They've canceled or taken out another threat.
Well,
So,
when they lifted the mask mandate, for example, it took forever, and people were still driving around in their cars alone with masks on, and this went on and on and
still
on.
are to this day.
It took
Still are
forever,
to this
and we're
day.
still seeing some of it. And I warned
Також
that was
забирали.
Oops, sorry.
yeah, so I warned that was going to happen because you had asked me at the time what's going to happen and I said nothing's going to happen
Nothing's going to change. Yep.
because it simply doesn't work like that. And you're seeing the same thing when they said, we didn't realize for years and years the truth of what actually happened here.
Yeah, and the bigger the scam, the longer it's going to take to sink because they've invested a lot in floating it. So
Exactly.
I want to get carried on here, and we've still got a long ways to go. My timing is probably way off on this. I figured we would probably be able to do this in 2 hours. Well, yeah, I don't think we're going to make it.
Yeah, it's not too bad. We're doing good.
All right, cool.
One day, a vehicle of the Wehrmacht with a loudspeaker was driven through Shitomir. Over the loudspeaker, the announcement was made in German and Russian that at a specific time that day, Jews were to be shot on the market square, something like that. Since I had the day off, I went to the market square at the appropriate time. When I got there, I saw 50, 60 Jews guarded by the SS. Then it was announced over the loudspeakers that people should follow to the executions.
After a while, we saw numerous soldiers and civilians heading for rail embankment ahead of us. Beyond, we were told executions were taking place continuously. Once we climbed up the embankment, we were confronted with a sight of gruesome atrocity which shocked and horrified an unprepared onlooker. There were countless soldiers of units stationed in the area, lounging around as spectators, some in swimming trunks, as well as numerous civilians with women and children.
Access to the execution site was restricted by a wall. The entrance was a high iron-barred gate which was locked. As a result, I couldn't get inside anymore. Alan stood in front of the gate with other soldiers and civilians looking through the bars to the execution site. It was about 80 meters away. I could see about 9 girls or women kneeling in front of a deep ditch. Some of the marksmen were splattered with blood.
At the time, it was not curiosity that drove me to watch. It was actually a disbelief that something like that could happen.
In one interview, somebody, she was in a class in a small village of Belarus, I think, and the director of the school gathered all the children and said, tomorrow there is no class because we kill our enemies. And so I said, you can go to see and you will say what you saw the day after in the school. And she said, we gathered all the children together and we went near the mass grave, so we knew the place. And she said, it was too early. The Germans were not here and the Jews were not here. So she said, we were waiting, sitting under a tree until it began. And so all the school was watching and they came back at night. And the day after, it was the course of the day.
the Genovese syndrome or bystander effect. In 1964, 29-year-old Kitty Genovese is assaulted and raped in the courtyard of an apartment house. The perpetrator leaves the scene. After 20 minutes, he returns, abuses his victim again, and then kills her. Evidently, 38 inhabitants of the surrounding houses observe the entire incident. Nobody calls the police. Nobody helps. The more bystanders observing an incident, the lower the probability that someone will intervene.
In the same way, bystanders who stand there and watch a mass murder without saying anything could be giving off the impression that even unconsciously, that the perpetrators will see and say to themselves unconsciously that I guess there's nothing wrong.
When they did have bystanders there, certainly that was an effort to normalize it and routinize it as something that is done, must be done, and has its good reasons.
And the more it's surrounded by an atmosphere of normality, the more it would prevent you from questioning it and saying, wait, this is wrong. I should not be taking part in this. Someone should be objecting. I should be objecting. I should scream that this is wrong.
The killers made it public to give a justification, like you make a public death condemnation in America or in another country. It's public because it was legal. So the fact effectively that they come reinforce the legality of the crime.
Back in Bibrica, Josip witnessed one of the many smaller executions.
Вони ті дістаповичі, розумієте, ми були там на вулиці, хлопчиська ще там ми літали, сиділи, стояли там таке, і вона скаже, беріть лопатку, ходіть сюди. Куди? Ходіть купати будемо ями. І от вона завели ось сюди і відмірив 4 кроки, 4 на 4, і купали 2 метри глибоко. І зробили таку сходку. Сходки, розумієте, і все. І тепер гайда, і нас вигнали от там на от там на того дерева, щоб не вийде. І дивимося, якраз ведуть групу одну. І вони роздівалися, сказали їм роздіватися. Ті всі одяг на бік. І самі лягали, розумієте, казали лягати, розумієте, не по сходах йшли туди вниз, лягати лицем до землі. А ті дістаповичі згори стріляли, розумієте, з карабінів. Карабінів не було, розумієте, з карабінів стріляли. Одну групу туди, ми трошечки потім нас накликали сюди, присипали, розумієте, другу групу привели, другу групу. І таке саме, розумієте, стріляли. І через них, розумієте, було дитина 4 роки мала. І цей, ми на якій вели по нашій вулиці, то до одного там сусід такий був, до одного каже, Михайло, він знав той єврей, його добре, Михайло, прощай, де вже більше не побачимо, і вони їх повели. Ось така справа, розумієте, все. А що, розумієте, цей, то шкода саме було тої дитини, розумієте. Воно ще могло жити, розумієте, не тільки що почало, розумієте. А це були молоді, правда, де були старі були молоді, розумієте, а молодим, а саме дитина, то саме скорше, саме гірше було, розумієте, шкода її, розумієте.
Зараз ми знаходимося в околицях села Волове, яке розташоване від Бібрики на відстані трохи більше 3 кілометрів, біля парафіяльного цвинтаря, який існував вже багато століть. Організовано було так, що вантажними автомобілями із гетто певними партіями довозили сюди безпосередньо на місце страти цих людей. Чергова партія вже була приготовлена, а такий був конвеєр. Тих, що вимордували тут, зараз за хвильку привозилася нова партія, знову там євреїв, які продовжувалися. Екзекуція тривала дуже довгий період, тому що не можна було так швидко позбавити всіх життя. І ці постріли були відчутні і в Шпильчино, і на Воловому.
А скільки приблизно людей єврейської національності були вбиті нацистами в час Другої світової війни з Біберка?
Ну, це та кількість населення, що було 2000, згідно наших статистичних даних, ніхто з них не вижив. Після 44-го року, коли вже прийшли другий раз сюди, вже не було ні однієї єврейської родини. Або були вивезені, або були замордовані, розстріляні на цьому місці.
The German arrived very early in morning, normally before the rise of the sun, and already everything is prepared. Already the ghetto is surrounded. Already the carts are waiting to take the suits or the Jews. Already the Polizei are here. And when they leave at the evening, all the Jews are dead. So what was very organized is to succeed to introduce a tempo in a village who has no tempo. That in one day the whole community was shot. In a few cases, they could not do it. In big cities, of course, so they send people back to the ghetto in some cities and to come back the day after. But normally, in one day, they shoot a village.
I drove out each time to see for myself if everything was done properly. For example, it happened that the SD fired into the lines with machine guns, thus not killing people immediately. I made sure that the execution were conducted according to specifications with a shot in the neck. I personally checked the procedure of the operation about 1 hour after it began, to make certain that no atrocities took place.
I am certain I aimed properly and hit accordingly as instructed.
At first, the German machine gun was used and later the Russian machine gun. The German guns had failed. Of course, single shots were possible with the German machine gun, but usually they got hot because they were fired so often that they gave sustained fire even when set as single shots. That's why we fell back on Russian guns.
The firing squad was at the trench, perhaps about 10 men, who took turns shooting. So half the group fired, while the other half stepped back and got the 08 pistols they were using ready for the next round. Not far away from the trench, there were perhaps 5 policemen who were busy reloading empty magazines.
A group of Jews were lined up at the edge of the trench. There must have been about 10 to 12. They stood with their faces toward the marksman. There was one marksman for each Jew. Then the platoon leader from the Waffen-SS gave the order to fire. The victims fell backwards into the trench. When it was noticed that many of the victims didn't die straight away, the execution method was changed. A meeting was held.
At the meeting, it was discussed that this method of execution was unbearable for victim and marksman. The reason was, when shot in the heart, about 25% were not hit properly, in my opinion. When shot in the head, not only did the victims have to face the marksman, but also roughly 5% were not fatally wounded. I cannot remember if during the conversation the legitimacy of killing Jews in general was discussed.
How to them it's so unprofound, not even having a discussion as to should they or should they not be doing it, but are they doing it quite correctly?
Well, they even, just by saying, this is unbearable for victim as well as shooter, they believe themselves to be humanitarians.
Wow. Almost unfathomable. In people think I'm being melodramatic or overstating when I call about what I see going on right now in the World Economic Forum Fourth Reich. I am not being melodramatic. I am literally seeing, and that's perhaps because of 50 years of research and study on exactly that, the Reich and all of these things, that I see it so profoundly clearly that it's so disturbing to me. Yeah.
Inside the mind of most healthy members of most species is a powerful resistance against killing your own kind. Animals with antlers and horns, they fight each other head to head in the most harmless fashion. Against any other species, they go to the side, they cut, they gore, they go for the kill.
Studies show that only 15 to 20% of all soldiers can overcome their reluctance to kill enemy soldiers. Military leaders have always tried to reduce this inhibition.
Most of us have been red with rage at one time or another. Most of us at one time in our life have been completely out of control with anger. But at the moment of truth, we didn't kill. We didn't go for the throat. We didn't go for the eyes. We didn't grab that knife off the table and stab. Why? Because when we become frightened, when we become angry, the forebrain shuts down, the midbrain takes over, and we slam head on into that resistance.
Yeah.
And in World War II, we discovered the existence of that resistance.
Yeah. Sorry.
And we learned that the way to overcome.
Yeah, this I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure what he's saying. He may be saying something that I'm not picking up on. But with when the forebrain shuts down, when it unplugs and goes offline, that's a traumatic reaction. But when it goes offline, the body starts to flood with chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol. And that's, I don't see where he's thinking resistance, because that's usually the time when you're now driven by reaction and not cognitive ability. So I'm not quite sure what he's right in what's happened. I mean, the brain is shut off, and he's right about that. But I don't think that I don't think the running into resistance at that stage is I don't know. I don't know what he's referring to.
I think that, and this is just me, it comes to a point where you're doing something where your self-preservation starts to second guess even the repetition and the programming. Maybe I don't know, but inherently we're not wired to kill. So that hesitation, you can probably, you can consciously overcome it in necessity, kill or be killed, right? A fight or flight, you've engaged in that fight mode, so you might be capable of killing, but at a certain point, and I don't know, but
yeah, but usually that's when your cognitive abilities are still online, because once they've gone offline and the rest starts to happen, you are now in raw survival. You are not thinking anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure what he's referring to, but anyway.
Comment was through training.
The behavior of the individual soldier is determined by his character, military training, most recent combat experience, and propaganda.
And you become trapped in this process in which you must believe the propaganda. Otherwise, these horrible acts that you're committing, either these people are truly inhuman and deserving of their fate, or I am an evil person doing evil things.
Absolution and legitimization by the group the soldier identifies with.
The military is very powerful at taking away any individuality, stripping away the sense of the individual, and creating the sense of the group. Uniforms, every warrior society had distinctive haircuts. The Spartans had the dreadlocks, the Romans were into high and tight, the Mongols had the forelock, the samurai had the top knot. During the Civil War in America, we were the Taliban. It was all about the beard, and now we're back to high and tight. It doesn't matter what your hair looks like. What matters is submission to authority. And so in uniform, in hair, we stand out. We're different. We're distinctive. And that creates this pseudo-speciation, in which we become a subspecies, all of our own, and we bond with our pack.
A legitimate commander's order, clear-cut, authoritarian structures.
The firing squad is the ultimate example of diffusion of responsibility. The orders come from on high, and it's their fault. And the commander says I have to do it, and it's his fault. And
that's why they have so many shooters for a firing squad, so that no individual soldier has to carry the weight of believing that they killed that individual. That's the whole purpose of it.
Sergeant is making me do it, and it's his fault. And all you have to do is just press the trigger. That's the only thing you have to do. Everything else has been done for you. All the thinking has been done. All the rationalization has been done. And of course, that doesn't exist by itself. It comes from a lifetime of obedience.
Physical and emotional distance, for example, through dehumanization. Participants of the execution squads kill at close range.
There is no great physical distance. There's very close range. So what you got to do is create psychological distance. One of the things we do is undress them. So they're not wearing clothing, they're like animals. And we turn them around so you don't have to look in their face, you don't have to look in their eyes. It's so much easier to kill people when you don't have to see their faces. That's the pursuit mode. You know, throughout history, we believe that most of the killing in the battlefield didn't happen in the battle. The historical battles were just great shoving matches. But when one side turned and fled, then the killing takes place. So they're all turned around. You don't have to look in their faces. You don't have to look in their eyes. We've done everything humanly possible to enable a close-range kill. It is so cunning and ingenious and frightening in the whole mechanism that was used to put in place.
I must say that Oberleutnant Gnade did give me the impression he found the operation truly enjoyable.
It's true that single members of the company were seized by some kind of bloodlust.
Again, he knocked down 2 or 3 prisoners. People who normally have little to say discover their talent of playing the ruthless master. How is all this going to end? There's a payday for everything.
That evening, an entertainment unit of Berlin policemen visited us as so-called front support. The unit included musicians and vaudeville artists. Its members had gotten wind of the forthcoming shooting of the Jews, so they offered their services and even explicitly wished to participate in the execution of the Jews.
Often soldiers of the Wehrmacht who were passing by stopped and participated in the shooting for a bit.
Regarding this execution, I can still remember that the SD people were drunk afterwards, so they must have received a special ration of schnapps. We policemen weren't given anything, and I know we were quite upset.
I know that some people counted accurately how many people they shot. They boasted among themselves with the numbers. The totals of some comrades went into the hundreds.
One of these policemen once showed me a cigarette case that was full of wedding rings. Where he got them from, he wouldn't say. I can well imagine.
When the Jews had currency on them, the money was kept in the platoon cash box and used to buy us beer.
There was an immense hatred towards Jews. It was revenge. We were after money and gold. No need to hush it up. The operation against Jews were profitable.
Afterwards, we spent several days flattening banknotes we had confiscated from executed Jews. I don't know what happened to the money. It was packed into sacks and dispatched.
At lunch, some comrades joked about what they had experienced during the operation. The stories told me that they had just completed a mass shooting.
I must admit that it gave us a certain amount of pleasure when we got hold of a Jew that we could finish. We did not recognize a Jew as a human being. We were also aware the Jews had to be annihilated anyway.
We shall rid ourselves of the last traces of any sentimental feelings for humanity.
When I opened the door to the room, I saw that an SS man was lying on the bed and that he had a young, beautiful girl with him. Since this SS man couldn't tell me where Hauptsturmführer Finger was, I went into a second room. There too, I encountered a young girl with an SS man. Since I didn't get a proper answer from him either, I entered a third room. In this third room, there was an SS man lying on the bed without a uniform jacket, but with his trousers on. Next to him, on the edge of the bed, sat a young, very beautiful girl, and I saw her stroking his chin. I also heard the girl say, "Right, Franzl, you wouldn't shoot me, would you?" I asked the SS man if this girl, who I assumed was a Jewess, really had to be killed. The SS man told me all the Jews would be killed. There wouldn't be any exceptions. Then I asked him about the girls I had seen in those rooms and what would happen to them. The SS man said essentially that it was tough. Sometimes they had the chance to hand these girls over to another firing squad, but usually there was not enough time for that. And they had to do it themselves.
The Stanford experiment. By a toss of the coin, 24 participants are divided into 2 groups, guards and prisoners. The guards are equipped with uniforms and truncheons. The prisoners wear frocks with numbers and are locked into cells. The guards soon begin to show sadistic behavior. They develop inhumane punishment for the prisoners. Several times, the experimenters have to intervene to prevent mistreatment. 4 prisoners suffer emotional breakdowns. The experiment has to be interrupted prematurely.
So I think this cluster of experiments on the power of conformity, the power of role adaptation, the power of deference to authority, together give us a sense of the group dynamic that is one key factor in explaining why people in these units became killers.
Well, I think it's important that we do the scientific work and then take a moment to step back and reassert the moral judgment and say, no, these things are wrong, no matter if we can understand them, no matter if they were inevitable, no matter if we say that most of us would have done the same thing under those circumstances, the actions are still wrong and we must still object.
I want to pause there for just a sec, Michelle, and bring up this comment because I think it's really how many of those people, those soldiers then and today, go and do their job, and how do they come back and live their lives? Is this part of the driver why we see so much abuse at home, because they're not functioning with what they're having to do in some of these forces or some of these services and careers?
Not the comment is interesting. Domestic violence for sure, not necessarily.
Mhm.
Not necessarily at all. You saw some of the letters they were writing home. My dearest bunny, and so on. And people like Hitler even was Himmler. All of it were Hitler, and there was somebody else. They asked, according to his mistress, he was incredibly kind.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
how she experienced him. This was something that was over here, and then the rest of their lives was here.
Yeah, Himmler was a doting father, but executed his 6 kids. Right. Right. Yeah. Saving the world, saving his kids from the evil world. That's pretty committed to the programming.
When I began my studies, some of my friends said, don't do it. You'll explain psychologically what they did, and therefore divest them of the evil, of the moral responsibility that they should have. I went into the study, and I believe that we have to try to grasp what the motivations were for people who kill in order to take steps to prevent that in our own imperfect ways. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that people are responsible for what they did. And in that sense, true psychological work is a moral enterprise. You don't leave morality at the door when you probe psychologically for reasons of their behavior.
I got to pause there. The guy's so on point, and we haven't even become close to beginning to understand the wrongdoings, the crime, the trauma, the abuse, all of those things. Because they're, as a psychiatrist, they can only see through a limited lens as to what they're going to be trying to hold to account and who they're trying to hold to account for it. Am I wrong?
Mm-mm. No. I see what you're trying to, kind of point out here. Repeat that last point of what you said, Wayne.
Through a psychiatric lens, he's 100% on point. They have to we have to look at these subjects. We have to have discussions through watch parties like this in my own, limited, clumsy, awkward way, but to have these conversations so that we can understand the why, the who, the what behind it. But we have to not limit it to just his expertise. For example, he can only see through a certain lens. That was exactly why I wanted you, the trauma practitioner, to identify more, because we're seeing so many people trying to function without understanding the mechanics of why they're struggling with that function.
Well, it's also exactly, and it's also why it is really relevant, even in communities, to have everybody's sort of differing opinions, so you can lay it all out on the table. Because through everybody's experience and worldview, you're going to get a different take on everything. I'm not saying every take is going to be valid or that you should take that, but you take everybody's and you lay it out before you come to a conclusion.
Well, in understanding it, and from the mechanical side of it, and then applying it to the moral structure, science isn't exact, but it's through deduction. And this is where the difference between psychiatry and trauma, in my opinion, is they're looking at the mechanics without the moral factor, and trauma looks at the implications on, all of the moral factor explodes into all of the machinations. So, you bring the morals into the conversation that a psychiatrist won't, because they're looking at the machinations.
Well, that's very typical of psychiatry, though. They that's what they do. They're doctors first, so everything is down to biology.
Right.
Exactly. Whereas everyone else, psychologists, clinical people like myself, are saying, no, that's not true. You can't sort of do that with what ails the soul.
Right. So it's an inconclusive discussion, only hearing from psychiatrists as to how evil becomes evil and how do we recognize it. We have to inject morality and values and all of those into it as well. And that's the differentiation, I guess, that I'm trying to make, is we need more lenses on this, and we need to have more discussions on this because of exactly things like that. All of the guys that give testimony in here, they're 100% correct, but it's limited amount of data. It's a limited amount of perspective and context, and we need more. And that's only going to come through discussion, and we have to have it.
I think we have to distinguish between an historical explanation of why people behaved the way they did and a moral framework in which people are responsible for their individual actions. The fact that not everybody killed, and we know that historically from the battalion, and in these experiments there's always a group of people that don't put the electric shock or don't go all the way. We know it is possible for people to say no.
With the first truck, my hand shook as I fired. But you get used to that. With the 10th truck, I aimed calmly and shot confidently at all the women, children, and babies, thinking of the 2 infants I have at home, and that these hordes would treat them in exactly the same way, if not 10 times worse.
My dearest, kindest mom, Traudi and Hans-Peter. Daddy has now been waiting for a letter since September 22nd, but unfortunately no
Then
sign
Blobel
of
gave
it.
me the order to operate the shooting of the children. I asked him who's supposed to carry out the shooting. He answered the Waffen-SS. You objected. I told him they're all young men. How are we supposed to justify to them that they have to kill little children? Then he said, so take your men. Once again I repeated, how could they do it? They have little children themselves. This tug of war went on for about 10 minutes. Then I suggested that the Feldcommandant's Ukrainian militia execute the children. No objections to this proposal were raised on either side.
Gathering berries, how perfect for them. What a treat. Incidentally, yesterday was Thanksgiving.
I didn't feel entitled, in regard to Jewish women and children, to let these children grow up to become avengers who would kill our sons and grandsons. The only thing missing was the sauce. But otherwise, delicious. Even
I spoke to one of the policemen and asked if it was difficult for him to carry out such an order. He said he had 2 children of his own, but he had gotten used to this kind of work.
Well then, my dearest, beloved mom, with kindest greetings and many thousand kisses to all my darlings, your good daddy.
I myself was in a very pleasant position, since I didn't have to kill babies with their mothers. The children I had to shoot were already big enough for their mothers to lead them by the hand.
I particularly remember an incident with a little blonde girl who took me by the hand. She also was shot later.
My goal was, and I succeeded, to kill children only. It worked as follows. The mothers led the children by the hand. The soldier next to me would shoot the mother and I would shoot the child. Because for certain reasons I told myself that the child would not be able to live without its mother. In a way, redeeming these children who wouldn't be able to live without their mothers was a way of easing my conscience.
Do the children always behave? Has Mukkele been studying hard? Has Volkmar stopped wetting his bed? Dagi must also learn to sit up straight at the table without leaning on her elbows. As a German girl, she'll travel the wide world once she's grown up. All the people will watch her and learn from her. After all, according to the will of fate, we Germans are the people of the future.
Again, there's that same lens that our current regime and controlling ideology all have. You know, they're the future.
From Hitler gaining power to the leader commanding them to make this, to them learning to divide it up into little pieces, to the overall triumph of Nazi Germany as they swept through Europe. All these pieces come together to dismantle one by one all of the rules that we've lived with as a civilization, and to say what is considered the ultimate bad, to murder a child, becomes the ultimate good. And this is the ultimate achievement of evil.
Often the religious use of the word evil tries to instill in it some supernatural force beyond human control. But I don't see it that way. I see evil as a purely human expression, a human potential. And it's the expression of evil that we create as human beings and in human settings that is our problem.
Unfortunately, genocide is part of humanity, deeply human. I don't like when people say it's unhuman, they were like animals. No. I would dream that. I would dream that.
That's to me is incredibly profound, because he's 100% right. Genocide is a human condition. It's been going on since humans have struggled to control each other. It's going on to this day in places, Ukraine, Yemen, all over Africa, South Africa, even. The Burkina Faso, China, here. And the question I ask people often is something for people to think about: what number, what is the body count before we could start using the word genocide? What is the number? I genuinely want to know, what is the number before we can are not going to be denounced for using the term genocide. I completely wrecked a liberal when I asked them that question, because they said, okay, well, there's been, maybe 50 people have been died, about this, and I added a few more facts. And okay, maybe a 1,000, and I mean that's when I asked them, okay, well, how many is enough? Yeah, before we can legitimately start to have that discussion. They're very good at saying, one is one too many. True to use that. One kid that doesn't get, that doesn't survive because of COVID, and you didn't get the job, is one kid too many. But yet they killed how many? Countless with their experimentation. So another absurdity and hypocrisy in the programming.
It's so interesting what you say about that, Wayne, as well, because it's this concept that 1,000 is worse than one.
Right.
When did this get to be about numbers?
Well, and that's the only way they see it.
Yeah, exactly. It's horrible.
They will defend their one to the expense of unlimited thousands of us, because we are not worthy of the one loss that they believe that they're pumping.
You put a drug out and it killed someone, the chances of you hearing from people, well, it was only one, is really high, as if we were talking about.
That makes it okay.
Yeah, everything's okay. Like it's horrible.
Yeah, yeah. So that word genocide is something that people need to start getting a little bit more comfortable in using.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was always a person with a higher sense of duty.
I can say with pride that however disagreeable their duties might be, my men have displayed a decent and upright attitude. They can look everyone straight in the eye and be fathers to their families back at home.
Not only did the men discharge the difficult duty they were given faithfully and meticulously in every respect, but in terms of their conduct, they also represented the best in soldiering. For example, during a social evening to which I invited them, they presented me with a donation of 15,150 Reichsmarks in cash. I sent the money to the Fund for Children of Murdered Ethnic Germans.
We had the moral right and a duty to our people to kill these people that wanted to kill us. However, we did not have the right to enrich ourselves with just a single fur, a watch, one Reichsmark or one cigarette or anything else. We will not even allow a small rotten spot to grow or take root. All in all, we can state that we fulfilled this most difficult task out of love for our people. And we have suffered no damage to our innermost self, to our soul, to our character.
Unbelievable.
That's that Trudeau level benevolence. That's right.
Mm-hmm. There it is, the yardstick about how we judge ourselves good people. I didn't take any money from them. I am clean. I'm so on. We didn't, we just carried out a very unpleasant task, ridding the world of people. We are good people.
The best exterminator of them all. He didn't take a single cigarette or a single gold tooth.
This is a lesson for everyone, though, Wayne. Like, introspection is a good idea. We have to stop judging our goodness by the kind of yardstick that we have at the moment.
And that yardstick is something that people really need to be looking at. Where are things wrong? What you're seeing and identifying as the problem as what is wrong is only the symptom of the wrong measuring stick that's been there for some time. So start uncovering the measuring sticks.
Exactly.
As far as I remember, the gist of what he said was that the maltreatment of Jews he had witnessed was not to his liking. It was our duty to shoot the Jews, not to torture and beat them.
The defendant should not be punished because of the act against Jews as such. The Jews must be exterminated. None of the killed should be pitied. In Alexandria, however, he let himself get carried away and committed atrocities that are unworthy of a German man and SS leader. These assaults cannot be justified the way the defendant claims as rightful retribution for the suffering the Jews have brought upon the German people. According to paragraph 147 of the Military Penal Code, the defendant is liable for punishment.
Most of you will know what it means when 100 corpses are lying next to each other, when 500 or 1,000 lie there. Having had to cope with that, and on top of it, with the exception of human weaknesses, having remained respectable has made us tough.
You can have faith in your dad. He always thinks of you and will not overshoot.
You do need a fanatical core of those leaders who create genocidal institutions like Auschwitz and Treblinka.
Great question. I think they're just about to get to that, but the section that they were just going through there it reminded me so much of Trudeau raving in his bomber leather jacket. You won't get on a plane, a train. You won't sit beside somebody on a bus. How long will we tolerate these dirty people?
How do these people cope afterwards? I'm assuming it means that he's talking about the Nazis themselves, but they cope just fine because they that whole trauma thing, that whole altruism and everything does not just go away because the event has gone away. That's how they could sit at the beginning of this film in the Nuremberg trials and plead not guilty.
Actually, that was why I paused, was this comment had come up, and we're just going to get to that part of the film here where they talk a little bit more, and we'll see how they you're right, they cope just fine, and it's alarming to me. Something you and I discussed a couple of days ago was, I watched thousands of hours of World War II veteran testimony from both sides, from all sides, from every nation and ethnic culture that fought in the conflict. And it's amazing to me how it's the Nazis that have no remorse. It's
They don't. And it's really interesting too that German soldiers who never really wanted to do this in the first place, Germany itself didn't suffer embarrassment until the truth actually started to be exposed and the trauma barrier started to break down, and they had a mirror held up, said this is what it was, not that. And so, but if you look at countries, we almost all have something incredibly humiliating in our past that we would prefer not to.
Those things are only wielded, those truths are only brought out, shined up, and used and weaponized when they're convenient for somebody else's narrative.
Well, I mean, this whole COVID phenomenon and everything else that's been happening for the last 8 years in our country is going to have to go down in history as one of the stupidest people on the face of the earth.
It's going to go down as the biggest mass murder, ethnic cleansing, genocide, medical experimentation, the summation of all horrors and nightmares ever devised. This is going to roll them all up and make them look like a kindergarten project by the time they're done with the current chain of events that they're manufacturing. So.
We're fortunate we actually have people who know it, so.
It's slightly different times now from then.
Or the Einsatzgruppen. And then you get what I call an atrocity-producing situation where the situation is so structured that ordinary people can enter that environment and be capable of committing atrocities because they internalize quickly the values and actions that are the norm in that environment.
Yeah, I think we have to get away from a notion that guilt is a zero-sum game. And so the more we blame Hitler, the less anyone else is responsible.
We got to stop blaming Trudeau for everything. That is a big point.
I think one has to look at the responsibility of each of these groups. Clearly, the primary responsibility is on the people with the greatest power and the people that make policy and the people that create these institutions, and this would be Hitler and the Nazi leadership. Nonetheless, that does not mean that people who are at the bottom, who are being drafted into service, who are being sent out there, don't have responsibility for what they themselves do.
At the end, you can say that this man or this woman who is shooting a small child in front of everybody, she or he takes the responsibility. And I cannot accuse him, his mother, his father, and his nephew. Okay, but at the end, he kills. If we suspend that responsibility, it's a catastrophe.
I just wanted to point out to Wayne that there's more than just the killing and the propaganda and so on. Himmler's SS. Himmler was an occultist. Himmler's SS were occult trained. The Jews were allegedly God's elect. So there's a whole element of stuff going on here that nobody's really talking about.
There's now we're heading into the danger zone,
right?
On that. There has been so many things that have been off limits for discussion, under threat of jail, for a very long time, and have left us ignorant to being able to have actual discussions. One of the things we're seeing play out right now, front and center in Ukraine, is the war in Ukraine and versus Russia has literally more to do with 100-year-old deep-seated hatred of fascists and communists, Bolsheviks, dirty, radical, different dialects of Judaism that are not really Jews, but fly under the protection of we can't argue or discuss them because they're quote unquote. These are the things that allow all of this to perpetrate and repeat. It's the same people, the same banks, the same institutions that rewrap, rebrand, relabel, recensor, and then repeat.
Well, if you recognize, if you actually with the SS, the Ashkenazi Jews are what you're talking about, the Jews who say they're Jews but aren't, but there was a really high percentage of high bloodline Jews that were destroyed by the Nazis. They were a focus, was the bloodline Jews.
Well, I'm sure they had the same confusion as most of the rest of the world today. How the heck do we know the difference? Fabian, Bolshevik, all of these different things. We're not allowed to talk about any of them, and there is no way on earth that they are all benevolent and good people. That's just mathematically, intellectually deceiving anybody to think that they are. But we're not allowed to have, and this is where that is such an interchangeable part of the weapon. These guys have got the Swiss Army knife, and it's so interchangeable. And now it's us. Yeah. And it's, again, yeah, you're so right. So many layers to the manufacturing, the making the monsters that commit the far the far hand of the evil, so that they maintain their plausible deniability.
Right.
By the way, I did not enjoy killing Jews.
The SS-Gruppenführer was a physician by profession, and he dealt with the assignment's psychological impact on his men.
It turned out that the men, especially the leaders, were frequently not up to the demands of the job.
The most primitive sadistic drive.
Unbridled alcohol consumption. Some had nervous breakdowns.
SS men who were assigned to execution squads had crying fits.
We had suicides, for example, and others eventually lost control and began firing shots rampantly in all directions.
Squads was temporary sexual impotence.
I've just had a terrible night. How can only a dream be as true and expressive as reality?
I've tried to suppress the images of the past, but I haven't succeeded.
My mood is very gloomy. I have to pull myself together. The sight of the dead,
Global is lying on his bed on the floor,
including women and children, is not very enlivening.
suffering from a nervous breakdown.
I'm an emotional wreck, again, just like I was back
I went to see him. Global was there. He was talking gibberish. He said it was impossible to shoot that many Jews.
The day's impression should be blurred by organizing social evenings.
Dostoevsky suffers in particular from delusions relating to the killings of Jews that he commanded himself and relating to other traumatizing events in the East.
I feel I'll never be able to achieve anything anymore. I wish I could ignore it and forget what I had to live through.
The overwhelming attitude is self-pity. It was my bad luck to be assigned to a unit that had to do this dirty work. Poor me, how I suffered day by day doing these terrible, hard things. Almost no thought about what this meant for the victims.
The guilt and the evil are so extreme, so grotesque, that you must block them out. Sometimes we find the paradoxical state in which the survivor may feel guilt-like emotions, or at least self-condemnation. It has nothing to do with, well, it isn't the same at all as legal or moral guilt. It's the feeling of guilt because he or she survived and others didn't, or because one didn't do more to stop the evil force. And the survivors may feel more of that than the perpetrators, because the perpetrators are in the process trying to avoid feeling what they were doing, avoid emotional involvement in what they were doing.
I'm aware that men from these units ended up in asylums. We therefore had to find a new and better way of killing.
I can't say whether I had misgivings about the use of gas in vents at the time. My primary concern then was that the killings represented a considerable burden on the men who were involved.
Now we had discovered the gas and the procedure. I always dreaded the shootings when I thought of the masses, the women and the children. I was relieved that we would be spared all these bloodbaths, that also the victims would not have to suffer until the very last moment.
During dinner, the Jewish question was discussed, both within the Generalgouvernement and around the world. It's very interesting for me to hear conversations like these. To my surprise, essentially everyone agreed that the Jews had to be wiped off the earth entirely.
In his decrees, the Reichsführer SS has pointed out that Asia is located to the east of the German Reich, that Poland is also part of it, and that the Poles are subhuman.
I can remember squadron instructions that took place in East Prussia. SS Obersturmbannführer Otto held a lecture in which he told us that the Russians, Slavs and Jews are inferior people. He said one could kill these people without scruples and without any qualms of conscience.
In the case of genocide, it is usually targeted in such a way that most people don't feel threatened. It's not at everybody. One of the key things of the Nazi regime, of course, is how the bulk of the people are in the Volksgemeinschaft. And it is Jews and gypsies and communists and disabled people on the fringes of society that are the people that will be targeted. Then you can organize people to break earlier rules because they will still consider themselves law-abiding citizens. They wouldn't think of going over and robbing from their neighbor. They wouldn't think of knocking down an old lady in the street so she can get run over by a bus. But they can shoot hundreds of people in the target group.
When you begin to classify people a little bit under you, it's the beginning of the genocide for me. It's the first step. It's why we fight also so much against racism. Because the key, without racism, Hitler couldn't do it, even with the economical crisis.
Now there's a mouthful there that I can't leave alone, and I need to kind of tie into a comment here a little bit further back. What we're talking about here tonight is how the mechanics of the extermination crews for the Jews were created. The original hatred, and this is something that we people have to understand. You even to stay out of the theological realm, even just historically evidenced, the Jews have typically, the people of that faith have been the money lenders, the bankers, the non-laboring, the non-leadership, the facilitators of business and commerce, and they have been driving those kinds of things, enterprises, throughout history and culture. And sooner or later, the people of wealth and power ultimately end up owing them a whole bunch of money, and there becomes a serious problem there. So historically, that can be documented throughout history over and over and over again. But the point that I want to make here is that wars are created by a whole bunch of really old men with a lot of money that dislike each other. So when they want to fight, they get a whole bunch of people that don't know each other to do the fighting for them. And it typically has to do with money and power, and ultimately then banking, which seems to be connected back to the people of the Jewish faith. So to keep religion and keep from being labeled anti-Semitic, it's more often about the money than it is actually about the faith.
They actually were perceived as having way too much financial power, and that they were gaining more and more. And Hitler believed that every of the world's woes were due to the Jews. Also because of their power. It was also there was an element also that the Jews hated Gentiles. And so the Jews' perceived hatred of anybody who was not Jewish actually drove that, well, if they were in the same position, they'd annihilate all you, and that's where they're headed. If you don't get these people out of power and you don't get them, we don't kill them, they will kill you because they hate you anyway.
I want to just kind of touch on this other comment completely out of left field, but Victoria Nuland launched a color revolution against Ukraine in 2014. I suspect the CIA was involved too. I have to add in there just a couple of little tidbits that would not have been possible without Chrystia Freeland facilitating, orchestrating it, and being the bagman, money man, negotiator to make that color revolution happen. And Prime Minister Harper sent her mother over to Ukraine to rebuild their justice system after the coup, so that they could eliminate the corruption out of the government in Ukraine. So Canada needs to bear some burden in all of that disaster and what's going on in Ukraine. That's something that, I hate to say it, guys, it really pisses me off that unfortunately I have to fight with people in the US to say, hey, give these guys some credit. They're badass criminal crooks that need to be taken out too. You guys didn't do it all.
Also, I'm sure you guys may have heard me talk about this with Wayne. I'm not sure, but after the war, somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 of Himmler's SS, of the SS, were actually brought into this country through rat lines through Halifax.
Way more than that. Way more than that, Michelle.
I know, but that's what they're saying. In fact, some are saying lower, but I'm saying how much they said. And so the Simon Rosenthal Center, a Jewish place, hired a Nazi hunter from the States, a guy by the name of, I think his name was whatever his name was. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, he came in. They wanted him to root out Nazis in Canada. All he came in here with was a Canadian phone book, you guys, and out of that, he had 1,000 names. He was able to track down and interview across the country about 57 of these Nazis that were given safe haven in this country. And they talked about, Hitler's final solution, their part they took in killing the Jews. They were doing just fine. He took it to the RCMP, and the RCMP said, yeah, we know. So, so we gave safe haven in this country.
They are so entrenched.
Yeah. how many Jews or how many Nazis and they changed the laws at one point, and allowed the absolute dregs of the SS is what was brought into this country back in
Poland,
the war.
Poland alone in 1999 was still sending 19,900 veterans benefit checks to Nazi serving soldiers living in Canada as of 1999. They were still sending 20,000 checks a month to Canada for their Nazis. Just Poland, only Poland, 20,000 checks a month to Canada.
Do you know, well, when this guy came up with these people that he had interviewed, not one was deported, not one. So when we're asking, how did these guys make out after all of this? Well, the German soldiers, I can't say for sure. Obviously, some of the things came bubbling up to the surface, which is not uncommon with trauma, and they wound up in institutions. But the SS, they just came to Canada for safe haven. They were doing just fine.
They were sponsored, paid, and bribed, and given carrots. Hunka was not an accident. That was not an embarrassment in the House of Parliament of Canada. That was an insult and a mockery. 100%. We're getting into the weeds here a little bit. Something that I could go on for 8 hours about on the outside of that. We're getting down to the tail end of this flick here. So
yeah.
Because who to kill?
Wherever we stand up for our German fatherland, we are proud to be able to help the Führer. The enormous significance of this time will only be understood by future generations. But we all want to withstand the test of history, full of pride, having done our duty.
We, the men here at the front, will certainly take the right path. Our faith in the Führer fulfills us and gives us strength for our difficult and thankless duties. It has gotten late. I'll finish now. I'll send you all my regards and all my love. Yours, Daddy.
Genocide is basically a political action, and it is the organizing of people to carry out a policy. In that sense, then, I don't think we change human nature, but I do think we can change political culture.
Could this happen in the United States these days? Well, Milgram showed that people will go along with commands to carry out orders. So in that situation, Americans would probably react not that differently from the Germans.
You mean like in Canada, how they're not reacting that much differently from the Germans? And wow.
However, would that situation really arise in the same respect? That I'm more optimistic that it could not.
And that's why our ideologies and the political and military structures that we build become so important, because whatever we think of as human nature or as the human potential, we see that it has the possibility of going in either direction.
Sometimes comrades refused to take part in the killings, including myself a few times. Nothing happened to me, nor to the others who refused the order. There were no repercussions from our commanders. We were simply assigned other duties. There were no threats of any disciplinary measures, definitely not of executions.
The Asch conformity experiment. Variation. If only one other participant gives a correct answer to the exercise, the subject then almost always insists on the right solution.
I was not approached about these operations. The leaders took men with them on these assignments, and in their eyes, I was not a man. Other comrades who shared my attitude and acted as I did were also spared these assignments.
Raschwitz yelled at me and insulted me. I can still remember the expression Austrian swine that he used for me. To my knowledge, he also used the term coward and other curse words.
Among other things, Ahrens called me a cowardly sissy and the like. He accused me of unsoldierly conduct, etc. But to harden me up, he ordered me to stand guard right at the edge of the pit, the mass grave. I suppose Ahrens wanted to show me that a soldier must do everything he's ordered to do. In the end, he said derogatorily, he's not even worth to be put at that post.
Milgram experiment. Variation. If the subject observes a staged procedure where the experiment is prematurely interrupted, the ratio of obedience is reduced by half. If two experimenters express different opinions about how to proceed, the level of obedience among participants is reduced to 0.
That's why monkeypox failed, folks. We didn't bite the second time, and for every person that said no, 10 more got some courage and said no.
It wasn't like when someone refused to carry out an order, he was immediately put up against the wall. That required much more serious demeanors. We would have been able to cope with difficulties. By difficulties, I mean that we were expecting to be reprimanded.
However, I had the impression that I was overlooked in subsequent promotions.
The only disadvantage I had as a result of my conduct was I had to serve more frequently as a guard than the others, and in addition, I was given much less free time.
And as we sit in the Nuremberg trials, it became enmeshed into our culture that saying I was just obeying orders is never acceptable. Suddenly, across the NATO alliance, across NATO troops, in the very beginning with the Nuremberg trials, we began the process of saying we have to raise soldiers who will not just obey orders. And this is a big deal.
I see the difficulties, not only philosophically, to change the way a nation thinks, but practically, how do you build a court which is going to hold people accountable and show them in their true light as murderers, not heroes?
This was the tragic fulfillment of a program of intolerance and arrogance. Vengeance is not our goal, nor do we seek merely a just retribution. We ask this court to affirm by international penal action man's right to live in peace and dignity, regardless of his race or creed. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law.
Why? Why only 24? For the ridiculous reason, only 24 seats. This theater is sold out. It's a ridiculous reason. But let's take the other extreme. You want to try all the murderers. I got 3,000 defendants. How long would it take to have a trial? Everyone is entitled to be presumed innocent, including Ohlendorf and Goering, until proven guilty in a court of law. And this is a principle which I adhere to as a Harvard lawyer. This is, to me, axiomatic. So I have to choose the highest ranking people. And the other 3,000, what happens to them? Is that just? Of course it's not just. Are you going to have perfect justice? Of course you're not going to have perfect justice. Some of them came up for denazification proceedings. Some of them were never tried anywhere. They either disappeared in Argentina or someplace else. And even those against whom we proved beyond doubt that they played a key position, 4 were executed. And the rest of them, within a few years, were turned loose. Is that just? Of course not. It's unjust. So you don't have perfect justice. You have symbolic justice because you're aiming for the mind of the people. Is it important to have those trials? Of course it is. If you don't have the trials, you have no way of establishing the truth and showing the victims that you really care.
For example, Jovka in West Ukraine. The 200-year-old synagogue is burned down. In a forest outside town, 3,500 people are shot. The largest single mass execution takes place in Babi Yar, near Kiev. 33,771 people are murdered within 36 hours. In Nuremberg, Otto Ohlendorf, the commander of Einsatzgruppe D, is convicted of murder in 90,000 cases. He defends himself by saying it was only 60 to 70,000 cases.
Because that's just so much less evil, right?
In the mass executions in Eastern Europe, about 2 million people are murdered, 1/3 of all Holocaust victims.
What I'm describing is a human failing, which has happened again and again, and is happening as we speak. It is happening. Cruelties, innocent people are being killed all around the world because we have failed to build the institutions that we need, which are necessary to maintain a more peaceful order.
Because for me, the challenge is for tomorrow. We must be in time. I wouldn't like that in 50 years, a movie is done about Darfur and said, how could I? Because nobody moves.
It isn't done only by teaching, by detached teaching, although we need some of that. It's also done by one's own ethical passions in contesting these destructive movements.
Perhaps one day you will be policeman or military or scientific or journalist in a place of killing. This day, you will have to do something. And I say at least take a picture and send to CNN. Don't wait the politician to move. Because politic machines are too slow. The time by United Nations and UNESCO and whatever, or NATO, decided to genocide is finished for the victims.
You know,
I'm hoping everybody gets to that before they start coming for the journalists, because Trudeau's already said he's going to life in a gulag kind of thing. Like, for real, folks.
I'll save you, Wayne. You know, I just, it was interesting what he just said, because I was just finished a 10-week course that I did with 8 to 10-year-olds up in Nanaimo, but just just boys. And they're pretty rambunctious. You know, when I first went out there, pretty traumatized little kids. And but I had showed them, and not all of them come from very good circumstances either. So I had showed them a little film in Japan, how they teach their preschoolers courtesy. It was how they get them pretending they're on a bus. And then they said the little girl in is pregnant, and the kid gets up and gives her a seat. And another one gets up for an old man, and so on and so forth. And when I finished the film, they were quiet, really quiet. And when I finished the film, I said, so how do you think those little kids would react if a bully came in and started pushing people around? And they said they wouldn't understand it. They would be horrified, because they're not raised that way. These are little kids saying this. Oftentimes in our culture, we tend to teach our children what's wrong, and we never teach them what's right. And we don't start that at an early age, like the teaching of courtesy, teaching of the courtesy that built their self-esteem. It builds their sense of honor and dignity and so on. And there are certain things, and thereby contributes to their success in life. And so because of that, there are certain things that would be incredibly foreign to them, and they wouldn't understand, like if somebody came in and bullied, because of how they started down in life.
Well, I mean, and that comes back to educating, like you said, about the measuring stick, I think, because just to say what they did was wrong, okay, great, but without educating them on what the measuring stick is to prevent that from happening again, we're ultimately going to end up in exactly that same situation. They may hold the Nuremberg 2.0, but you'll see by what ultimately happened by the verdicts of that, what 24 of them actually got executed. There was only 10 executed out of 24, because they only prosecuted 24 because that's all they had seats for. So it was token justice. And if there's no real deterrent, isn't guaranteed it's going to happen again. So now they've shifted slightly. So it's not now necessarily the military committing the genocide. They're just protecting the political agenda and policy genocide, so that they can carry on, with the exact same repeat again. That's
It
how
is.
I.
It is. It's so stupid, but like it really is. We don't do things. We even have academic color. Well, we used to. We have academic color charts and stuff for kids in school, rather than using those color charts for resilience qualities and helping them to learn to master things or independence or their altruism, and we don't, and all of those things are feeding the soul, which is what is going to contribute to their brains working properly and their own success and their sense of honor and dignity. We don't teach them any of that.
The Indians have a saying for that. The good wolf and the bad wolf both live inside us, but the one you feed is the one that's going to grow strong, right?
I'd love to know how many. I'm assuming many of your listeners also found that this was deeply disturbing.
There was some comments that came along the way, and I want to thank everybody that stuck it out. 3 hours on a Saturday night. I'm grateful. This wasn't an easy conversation. It was not an easy project to do, but I strongly believe that there's so much merit in making these parallel notes and shattering that, breaking that you know hypnosis. Like I said, at I forget which test it was, where all it took was a second person to say, no, that's actually the same size line, and then all of a sudden everybody did it. And this is where we don't need 100% of the population to stop the evil. We just need 20% of the population to recognize some of the points that we laid out here, because then we can reestablish and dust off that measuring stick on so many things that we see going wrong, and maybe address them, in a different way. But again, this was a really, really tough one to do. Thank you so much, Michelle, for biting this one off. This wasn't an easy discussion to have out there in the public, and there was some comments that said they'll have to, too late at night for this subject matter, or too deep, they'll have to take it in bite-sized pieces. And I completely understand that, folks. But I think that this was something that was important for somebody, even if it's an unqualified, clumsy fool like me, to
I
take
got
on and tackle any which way. So.
I got to hand it to everybody who stuck it out too, because it was even hard for Wayne and I. And when Wayne sent me the video, I did call him and I said, "Oh, that was hard. That was rough." And I hear everything. I mean, I hear every nasty story. You wouldn't think this would be difficult. It was very difficult to watch.
Carol, this comment is exactly why this video scared the hell out of me so badly, because I had to, I mean, I'm not going to lie to anybody, least of all myself. When I first watched this and I thought about it, like I said early at the beginning, at 20 years old, I don't know that I would be able to resist being programmed and pushed down into doing what some of these soldiers ultimately were end up doing. Because as we could see there was at least 80% took part at some point, and it goes through a cycle. And I like to think I'm a good guy, but we ultimately, there's an old saying, you sooner or later you become what you're surrounded by. And if nobody else is surrounding you, you are going to become one of them. And this is what we're trying to shake, rattle, and roll people, out of that lullaby a little bit, and say, no, 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 no. And don't be afraid to use this video, guys. Have a watch party of your own. Unpack some more of this. This is a worthwhile discussion, because if we don't remember our history, we will repeat it. And we haven't got time to learn it all. But y'all got a really in-depth unpacking of a certain number of things tonight. So thank you so much for hanging out with us, all of you out there. And I'm surprised we had upwards of 250 people tuning in just on Rumble alone, for the most part, average. So more than I expected, and I'm very grateful for everybody for tuning in for this.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, last words for everybody, Michelle. When I find something else that disturbs me that badly, will you come back and help me dissect it for the community?
I sure will if I can. I wish I had all the answers. I don't, but I'd be happy to. It's
Well,
always a good time, Wing.
I think the more that we talk about it, the less difficult the conversations become.
I agree with that for sure. Yeah. And, I mean, we have the opportunity now just to go out there and make our communities, put them back together, make our communities strong, reach out to our neighbors, spread as much altruism and good as we can, because it will only take one community standing up and saying, yeah, not in this community, you're doing that. And trust me, others will also stand up.
I wanted to take something that these guys had done with this documentary and say this is how it happened, and to kind of turn that into a this is how it happened, this is what not to do or what to watch out for, and don't let this happen. So I think that we did a pretty good job of that tonight. So could not have done that without your expert consultation and discussion for many hours before actually getting to this. But
Well, I'm so pleased that you asked me. Thank you so much. It's a great opportunity, really.
well, I was very startled that I could even come across something like this initially, and immediately grateful that I am blessed to have people that could add to the discussion and make it more digestible and more empowering for everybody. So,
Wow, video, Wayne. Thank you.
awesome. All right, Michelle, I will let you go and shut this off and let everybody else go. And so I'm sure somebody's got a life out there somewhere. So have yourself an amazing weekend, Michelle.
Thanks so much. You too.
All right, guys. Wow. That was a roller coaster. I've been kind of dreading, not dreading, but I wasn't really sure how that was going to all go, because I knew what we were biting off, and I can't say it often enough. Thankful for you guys that nobody I could see in the comments took this in any other way than what it was intended to be. So, um, whew. So, and this was something out of left field, very unique. A Saturday night with a little bit of difference, with some real meat and potatoes in this today. Haven't got schedule lined up for next week, but I'm sure we'll have some amazing stuff. Molly, I've followed her. I've reached out actually to Sabrina actually, and hopefully I can connect back with her. But so much going on. I'm going to be talking about Iran probably tomorrow. I'm probably going to do something tomorrow afternoon, guys. I'm watching it. I'm paying attention. For now, all I can say is, what does anybody what does anybody expect? Did nobody expect this? That would be incredibly naive. And these are just things that we've been saying for a long period of time. So I'll put some stuff together on that. And I was kind of tossing around doing just a you and me kind of thing tomorrow afternoon. Give you guys a little bit of a State of the Union address on some things that are going up in my universe that might impact what's going on and what I've been able to do for you guys over the coming weeks. So things are changing, and yeah. A little bit more on that tomorrow. So at the end of the day, I love you all. We're all in this together. We all end up in the same psychotic utopian hell if we don't get it together. But hope we've done something to encourage you, inform you, educate you, inspire you, and let you know you're not alone. So stay strong, stay Canadian. I love you all, and I will play you out with a video from one of my favorite sponsors, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them tomorrow too, because they're getting a real bad rap and not nearly enough love. So I'm going to do something, educate everybody a little bit more on what I'm doing outside of just education. We're fighting back in a lot of different ways. So I love y'all. Stay strong, stay Canadian, and we will see you tomorrow.